Chapter 1. My bones can scream. Yeah, she's been told by many people before, as well as her friend, that it was painful. But for whatever reason, she figured they were either exaggerating or just trying to scare her. She really should have listened. Hold on, ma'am. It almost over. Ra-a-a-h-h-h. She cried with pain and frustration. The pain was because of the actual pain she was experiencing, and the frustration was because the doctor had told her that nearly 2 minutes ago. Hold on, girl. You got it. You're doing great. She looked over to the woman that said that. Through her teary, strained eyes, she could see a familiar face that she's known for nearly all her life. Short, spiky blonde hair, red eyes, and her usual determined smile, even if it looked more concerned than normal. Thanks, Mitsuki Pant. I'm glad you're here. The combination of pants, grunts, and trying to concentrate on the task at hand made the sentence much harder to pronounce. What are you thanking me for? You were there when I gave birth just 3 months ago. You think I'm gonna miss out on you doing the same, Inko? The blonde woman gave a face of fake offended, which had caused a short chuckle out of the greenette. Push. Oh God, Inko said to herself. After what felt like hours, which was actually just a couple minutes, Inko had successfully given birth to her first child. As she's already known for months, it was a baby boy. She held him ever so gently in her arms. Wrapped up in a soft blanket, she saw his face for the first time. As she expected, chubby cheeks and small nose. Just how every other infant comes into the world. It was easy to tell who had taken after because of the green hair that matches hers. The only difference being it took the same style as his father's. A pang of sadness came over her at the thought of the man. Just as quickly as it came, it left with another wave of joy of finally seeing her baby sleeping soundly in her hold. So, whatcha think? Mitsuki asked with a quiet tone as to not awake both children each mother held. A little bit after Inko had birthed her own kid, Masaru came in with little Katsuki in his hands. Giving a quick smile to her friend, Inko looked at the innocent being she brought into the world. Worth it. Is everything still going good in here? The 3 adults looked to the doctor that had quietly entered the room. Yes, doctor. And thank you again. Inko gave an answer to which the doctor smiled. There is no need to thank me, Mrs. Midoriya. If you have any questions, just let me know, the doctor said before turning back to the door. A minute after he left, the room fell into a comfortable silence. Inko continued to awe over her firstborn, and the other 2 parents either witnessed the happiness or reminisced the day of the birth of their own boy. Then a wiggle. Inko giggled to herself to see her baby squirm slightly before resting once more. So, what are you going to name him? Masaru asked curiously. Beside him, Mitsuki looked just as eager to know. Inko knew the answer. It was a name she had picked out for a long time. Izuku. As if it were fate, the newborn opened his eyes. Inko was astonished to see the pitch-black voids with tiny green irises that glowed. 4 years later. Izuku, where are you? Inko sang her words to where they reached the entirety of the home. The mother smiles to herself when the first place to look popped up in her head. Taking her sweet time walking towards her destination, she approached the closed door. Opening it revealed the space behind it to be a small storage closet. She took a moment to look around before beginning to shift some of the objects around. One thing after another, she saw nothing that she didn't expect. After another short minute of searching, she backed away and closed the door behind her to go look elsewhere. Then there was silence. Not a noise and no movement. Slowly, the doorknob began to turn. But not from the outside, no. From the inside, the handle fully turned that caused the latch to release and the door to open gently as to not make any sound. From behind the door, a small head with dark green messy hair peeked out. Looking left and right, the little boy declared that he was successful. Just as he stepped out to enact his second part of the plan. Gotcha! It was a surprise when Izuku felt arms scoop around his waist and lift him up. The boy began to squeal when Inko dug her head into his neck and blow her lips onto his skin, causing a sound that comically resembled a fart. Ha ha ha, you thought you could hide from me? Inko said teasingly while walking over to the living room couch and plopping her son onto it. But I covered my eyes so you couldn't see the glow. The young boy replied in between laughs. Which is exactly why you didn't see me when I spotted you huddled up in the corner. Inko revealed while raising a pointed finger compliment her explanation. The boy before her adopted a look of realization before he laughed to himself once again. So, what would you like for lunch, young man? When Inko asked this, Izuku laid back on the couch as Inko made her way to the kitchen, half expecting what his answer already was. Katsudon. The boy's excited shout was paired with the woman's amused chuckle. Taking a quick look over her shoulder, she saw her son was now leaning over the arm of the couch with the purest look of happiness. His big grin that had a number of tiny freckles at the corners of his lips that nearly met his wide eyes. She remembered the first day she saw them. And just like that day, they were still pitch black. But not the kind of black where it looked like instead of white it was a dark color. It was black as in it looked like there was nothing at all. Like there were colorless voids where his eyes were supposed to be. The only indication that he even had eyes was the two little orbs of bright green that just seemed to float in his sockets. It was safe to say from the day he was born that Izuku would be getting a quirk. Kids who were born with qualities of their powers from the day they are birthed is rare but does happen. It was with that information that Inko didn't freak out and think that something had gone wrong. Other than that, Izuku was just a normal boy with big dreams. Both were greatly expecting his quirk to come in any day now. And when it did, no matter what it was, Izuku was going to take it to the top and become the #1 hero. HMHM, Katsudon it is. Inko jolted up in her bed. For reasons unknown, she was in a cold sweat and her heart was racing. Looking around her dark room, she found not a single thing that could indicate her sudden awakening. But the feeling would not go away. Following sudden maternal instincts, Inko jumped out of bed and ran to the door that did little to slow the woman. Rushing down the short hallway to where her son's room resided, she opened the door and scanned the room. With the little light provided from the hero-themed night light, her heart skipped a beat when Izuku was not in his bed. He was on the floor in front of her, face down and an arm stretched out towards her, as if he was trying to open the door himself but collapsed suddenly. Izuku! Even for how light she was, she felt the room around her shake from how hard she dropped to the ground. The pain in her knees from doing so were nothing but background static in her frantic mind. Inko quickly rolled him over and placed him on her lap. She inspected nearly every part of him in seconds, trying to find a clue to what happened. There was slight relief when she saw that he was still breathing. She mentally connected a few dots together and had the thought to check his eyes. Gently holding the back of his head with one hand, she used the other to carefully spread apart his eyelids. The usual voids of black were there, but his green pupils weren't. In a shocked gasp, the mother picked the younger greenette up and charged out the room and towards the front door. Just before taking a foot out into the warm night, she used her quirk to nab the keys that she had almost forgotten and off she went. Laying Izuku down in the back seat and then hopping behind the wheel, she gassed the car towards the nearest hospital. Unlike the normally relaxed posture she has when driving, she was instead pulled close to the wheel while looking like a maniac with her jerking head turning to every possible detail she saw before her. In just a second, she would have seen the road, then look back to Izuku in the rearview mirror, then to the sides of the road, then back to Izuku, then in front of the road. Everything seemed to go by so fast yet slow at the same time. The passing headlights above were almost hypnotic each time the cycle of dark and light came over the car. The sounds of her own breaths were even louder than her tires speeding on the pavement, and entire her body shook uncontrollably. Finally giving a glance to the silent radio in her car, she was able to see that it was almost 3 in the morning. Inko had fallen asleep at 9:30 and Izuku went to bed 2 hours earlier than her. For all she could have known, Izuku very well could have dropped just 10 minutes after she put him to bed. There was the possibility that for nearly 8 grueling hours, her baby could have been dying on his own floor and she wouldn't even know it. Inko couldn't do it. She couldn't. Not her only child. Her Izuku. As she's done many times before, the mother looked back to her son to see if anything has gotten better or worse. She didn't know if him sitting up straight in the middle seat while staring directly at her with an emotionless face counted to being either good or bad. But the fact that he still didn't have his green pupils and there what looked to be black cracks coming out instead sent a feeling of dread come over her. Pulling a move that only a mother could, Inko braced her left foot down on the floor, used the other to slam on the brakes before using her right hand to twist around the seat and grab her son to keep him from falling forward with the momentum of the moving car. Surprisingly, it worked. The car skidded to a stop and neither of the greenettes were flung out their seats thanks to the efforts of Inko. The moment the car to a final halting point, she smacked the vehicle in park and twisted herself to lean over her chair. Taking both her arms that were now free, she latched onto both his shoulders and gave a quick shake as to get his attention. Even if he was still staring directly at her with empty eyes, she knew that something was wrong. Something was holding her son back from letting him come back to her. If the strange black marks that were emerging from his sockets was anything to go by, then this for sure had to be his quirk manifesting. From the looks they had, the marks seemed to be cracks. Staring at them for a moment, Inko realized that they were growing. Slowly, they made their way all across his face. Around his cheeks and down his jaw looked to be where they were more active. Izuku, Izuku, please tell me that you're okay. If there's something wrong, you have to tell me. Right now. Izuku? No matter what she said or did, his state of unresponsiveness remained, the cracks getting larger and longer. The fearful mother had to accept that there was nothing she could do to help and decided to continue their way to the hospital. Pushing her son back against the seat and sliding back down into hers, she prepared to set the car to drive and head out. Just as she grabbed the shift, something in the back of her mind told her to take one last look. And so she did. Just in time to see Izuku's mouth open. His body ached. That was new. For as long as he remembered, his body never ached. He could tell that he was awake, but it was hard to move. Every part of him felt like cement. That, or he was just extremely tired. The latter makes more sense. Even opening his eyelids was a task. Izuku was home. But that was to be expected. He didn't remember going anywhere last night. What was unexpected was that he was in the living room instead of his own. The interior of the house was lit up by the late morning sun that felt warm on his face. Noticing just exactly where he was, Izuku found out he was on the couch. Realizing the rhythmic movement around him, Izuku slowly turned his head to see none other than his mother laying there with him. What he was feeling was her breathing. She looked even more tired than he felt. However, it was the tiny scratch marks all over her that caught his attention. Another few moments of investigation, he found what probably played a big part in him feeling like he was in cement. Inko had wrapped her arms around both his own as well as his waist. While he loved his mother's affection, this was a little too tight for him. Carefully wiggling himself out of her loving prison, Izuku got himself free. Upon doing so, he discovered another detail that was different from the previous night. These were not the pajamas he wore to bed. It was difficult for his 4-year-old little mind to understand what was going on as he searched for any other possible clues to what happened last night that he was sure was just any other night. His right arm twitched, but he ignored it. Izuku perked up at the sound of a voice reaching his ears. It was so barely audible he nearly missed it. Turning, he finally saw that the T.V was on. The volume was so low that it almost couldn't go lower than that. Since he watches it all the time to see anything about heroes, Izuku immediately knew that it was the news channel. He knew that Inko didn't like it when the TV was on when no one was watching it, so he headed over to turn it off. Along the way, he felt his left side tense for a split second before relaxing, again ignoring it. Just before his tiny finger could press the power button, there was something on the screen that stopped him. Ignoring the news guy talking on the screen, Izuku inspected the scene of which he stood. The boy recognized the street that was on camera to be the one just a few blocks from here, and it was destroyed. His neck twitched. Not to a sense where houses or cars were flipped over, but there was definitely an assortment of broken things. The first thing he noticed was the nearly unlimited amount of glass shattered all across the streets and houses. The windows of homes and cars, the bulbs from the streetlights, pretty much everything that was made of glass. However, he did see that some cars have damages to them. Dents, scratches. One looked like it had a tire completely torn off. His right hand flexed before easing. Once again, we are getting reports from people all around the neighborhood that late last night around 3 o'clock, there was what many have described to be a monstrous screech. It was during the period of when the sound was going off that people said any glass materials they had shattered. Unfortunately, no one has seen or heard anything since, as they all had the suspicion of a villain attack. However, the best clue so far is that some had heard screeching tires minutes before the screech. Further investigation is being done, but as of yet, mid-sentence, the screen before Izuku's widened eyes flashed off. In the reflection of the black screen, the boy could see his own glowing green eyes before making out the figure of Inko sitting up on the couch. Turning around, he saw that she was indeed awake and held the TV remote in her hand. Somehow, it was only until now that the boy saw the wet stains trailing down her eyes. "Izuku, we need to talk." 10 years later. "All right, kids, listen up," said kids that were previously chattering to themselves gave their attention to the teacher up front. It's important to know that as third-year students, you need to start thinking seriously about what you're going to do the moment you are no longer students of this school. Your lives will be beginning quicker than you know it. I could just pass out these career aptitude tests, but before finishing the sentence, the adult snatched said papers off his desk and looked to the class with a smirk. "Why waste time when I know that you all want to go to the hero track?" At that rhetorical question, the man did a spin and threw the papers in the air, the blank sheets flying through the air before gliding to the floor, during which the class erupted into cheer while their quirks made just as much of a show, some being minor elements while others presented their physical qualities, one of which being an overly muscly guy who flexed to no end. Another was a boy who was strangely pulling his eyes out of his sockets and waving them around. Izuku watched all this happen with a deadpan stare. Seeing as this was just another waste of his time, he resorted back to his notebook. The villain fight this morning was enough to keep him occupied with this day's events as to not be overcome with boredom. His half-lidded eyes that were actually non-existent trailed over the number of notes and information he gathered when Mount Lady appeared from nowhere and drop-kicked the villain into subconsciousness. His right thigh jerked ever so slightly. It was cool, sure, but the way she did it was annoying. It was quite obvious that Kamui Woods had it under control but decided that it was a good idea anyway to just send her 50-foot-tall ass crashing into the villain that then caused the same villain to destroy whatever he landed on. Sheesh. People are so careless. In regards of the aptitude tests, he knew exactly what he was going to do. What else was there possibly to do? If you didn't try for the highest, then you'll only get the lowest. That's why I'm aiming for UA, huh? You sure you got what it takes, Midoriya? The mention of his name and the question snapped Izuku out of his thoughts and towards his teacher. The man was looking at him with a nearly unreadable expression, but the boy could see the hidden intent. Everyone else around him was doing just the same, the only difference being that they made no effort to hide it. Along with them, Izuku saw a very certain blonde standing on top of desk in a frozen state. Only a single finger on his hand spasmed for a second. "Let the show begin," the greenette groaned inwardly to himself. "As a matter of fact, yes I am." He stated it plain and simple. There was nothing else to it. Yet, the people around him seemed to kick one hell of a kick out of it as they burst into an even louder ruckus than before, this time being laughter and mockery. "Ha ha ha ha. And just what are you gonna do? Huh? Give them your Medusa stare? Ha ha. He probably thinks that he can just get in by grades alone. What an idiot. No, he'll probably just try to scare them or something dumb like that." The insults kept coming. And what did the teacher do? Nothing. Oh well, nothing he hasn't dealt with before. With one simple action, the class slowly died down and looked at the boy with confused and stunned expressions. Izuku was yawning. After letting that happen, he looked back to the class with the same unimpressed emotion on his face. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that your comments were so hurtful and breathtaking that I needed a moment to catch my breath. But now that I've done so, why don't you continue to waste yours?" Izuku was practically leaking sarcasm from his words and didn't even try to look sorry. Meanwhile, the kids looked just plain stupefied. Sure, he would always give that same face that said he was unaffected, but he almost never said anything back to them. But even then, it wasn't anything along the lines of insulting them back. Deku! Here we go. A hand slammed onto his desk that let out a small explosion at the same time, resulting in a new scorch mark on his desk. Thankfully, Izuku had managed to grab his notebook out of the way before it could be caught in the crossfire. Who the hell do you think you are to suddenly grow a damn spine? You fucking weakling? You seriously think that you can use the useless quirk of yours to be a hero? Stop telling jokes when you are one, dumbass. Katsuki Bakugo relentlessly spewed even more insults and threats to the other boy who barely batted an eye. I've always had a spine, Bakugo. I just don't see the need to waste it on this class, especially you. It wasn't normal for Izuku to take it this far. Usually, he would just ignore anything and everything around him until they finally shut up and left him alone. Guess even he was starting to get tired of it. Heh? What? You think you're some hot shit all of a sudden? Keep talking and you really will be hot when I smoke your ass. Using the hand that wasn't still pressed on his desk, Bakugo brought it close to Izuku before releasing a few pops as a way to intimidate the greenette. He failed. Bakugo. Izuku said the name with a hint of venom. But that wasn't what shocked the class. It was that the shorter boy hand raised his own hand to hold the blondes tightly, seemingly unaffected by the small explosions that still went off before stopping when Izuku went to speak again. Using your quirk, even in school, without a hero license is against the law. Please try to control yourself. Every hero knows that. With the venom being paired with mockery, the two boys met each other's gazes. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, waiting for something to happen or for someone to make a move. For a bit, it looked like it was going to be Bakugo as he looked even more pissed than before and raised his other hand off the desk to most likely attack with it. All right, you two. That's enough. The teacher that finally decided to do his job called out to them just in the nick of time. Bakugo looked miffed or coarse, but did smack Izuku's arm away and return to his desk, cursing all along the way. After the class settles down and returned their attention to the teacher, Izuku looked down to his hand. Over a majority of his fingers had burn marks and singed skin. There was even the faint smell of burnt flesh coming from it. Izuku merely blinked at the sight before hiding his hand in his pocket. It was only a few seconds later that he pulled it back out to reveal not a trace of the injury. Besides the short confrontation, the day went on rather normally, except for the occasional time where Izuku would spot someone giving him a strange glance, probably thinking about his earlier retaliation. It didn't matter to him. All that mattered was that class just got over and everyone was leaving. The greenette wanted to leave but knew that it would only be after a confrontation if the boy who crappily hid around the corner of the door meant anything. It was in that moment when Izuku realized him. He felt the notebook in his grasp that was about to be placed neatly in his backpack was swiped out of his grasp. Naturally taking a look at his hand to see that it was indeed missing, he turned even further to spot the culprit. Bakugo stood confident as ever with a scowl on his face and Izuku's notebook held tightly in his hand. On both his sides was another one of his classmates, also known as suck-ups just to try and get a speck of tainted brightness that Bakugo has claimed himself to give. What? Did you actually think that this was over, Deku? I don't know when the hell you suddenly grew a pair, but you better knock it the fuck off, the blonde said in a calmer manner, even if the anger in his eyes was more than apparent. Watcha got there, man? His diary or some crap? One of the other two kids said while taking a peek at it. Notes on how to be a hero? Ha ha ha, you're kidding me? So, he does know that he's pathetic, the second boy said with dark humor before laughing like the other. Don't think I haven't noticed you scribbling in this all day like the twitchy fuck you are. If you really have to take the time to take notes on how to be a hero, then you think that you would figure out that you're not cut out for it. It was too easy for Bakugo to use words that would break anyone's spirit. He's been doing it for years, after all. However, the boy before him that still sat in his chair hardly seemed affected by his words and looked to be more distracted by the notebook that he held in his hand. This should do the trick. At the thought, Bakugo pulled his free hand out of his pocket before sending it to the object in his hand. Explosions at the ready. The blonde was never able to do as he planned when Izuku launched out of his seat towards him. In shocked reaction of the sudden movement, Bakugo flung the book behind him and redirected his hand to aim for the greenette. Again, his hand never met its target when Izuku rushed past him in a blur. The shorter boy wasn't out of Bakugo's sight for a second before the blonde spun to see something truly bizarre. Izuku was hanging out the window, one foot placed on the ledge while the other hung freely outside. One hand was latched around the corner of the wall, and just in the tips of his fingers in his other hand was the notebook. Izuku had managed to catch it just before it fell to the ground below. Pulling himself back with his arm, Izuku hopped down from the ledge and took a moment to brush off his possession. His back turned to the surprised three. "Bakugo, there is nothing you can do to deter me. I'm assuming this is about me wanting to go to UA, correct? Well, guess what? I'm still going." Even if Izuku was facing away from them, they could easily hear the anger in his voice. "And there is nothing you can do to stop me." Bakugo was livid for several reasons. First, Deku was talking back to him. Second, Deku didn't even seem fazed by him. Third, Deku. "TCH, I don't even need to stop you. You'll get your dumbass crushed in the entrance exams. You're nothing but a useless, weak, pathetic, little bug that anyone can crush. You're nothing." Bakugo tried to think of anything to say that could get under the greenette's skin. He wanted to see him hurt. He wanted to see him cry. Then a dark idea came to mind, and Bakugo smiled. "But, since you sound so confident, why don't I give you a bit of advice?" "And what could you possibly have to tell me that is anything close to advice?" Izuku asked while just barely turning his head for one eye to glare at the blonde. "If you really want to be a hero that fucking bad, then how about you just pray for a better Quirk in your next life after you take a swan dive off the roof?" Bakugo both looked and sounded like a maniac from the way he spouted the awful words. His eyes sadistically wide and a wide grin on his face. Before he could react, there was something else on his face. Izuku's fist. With an impact that sounded more harder than what was expected, Bakugo was flung backwards from the surprising amount of force. The blonde landed with a painful grunt a few desks back but continued to slide on the ground until his head was nearly out the still open door. The throbbing sensation in Bakugo's nose was something he's never experienced before. He's been in many fights and knows what pain feels like, but never has he been hit like that in his life. It was downright stunning to feel a warm liquid rush out of his nose not a moment later after landing in the ground. Straining a growl instead of shouting out in pain, Bakugo clutched his nose and sat up to look furiously at the bastard that dared to punch him. He almost gasped when he saw the sight. Izuku looked more pissed than Bakugo has ever seen him. He knew it took a lot to get the greenette mad, but this was on a whole other level. His lips were pulled into the biggest snarl that showed his clenched teeth. His eyes were wide with disbelief and anger as they glared daggers at the downed boy. If looks could kill, then Izuku wouldn't have needed to spin around and deck the blonde straight in the nose. But out of all that, it was the large crack-like marks growing out of Izuku's eyes that really shocked Bakugo. What the hell were those? He's never seen anything special regarding Izuku's mysterious quirk. Everyone just summed it up to be only the dumb glow in the dark pupils and void-like eyes. Yet there was. And that wasn't all. On the fist that was still extended, Bakugo could very clearly see the skin and flesh on his knuckles looked as if it was peeled back to reveal the bones underneath. That was when he realized why that punch hurt so damn much. The brief stare-off between the two didn't last long before Izuku's eyes shifted from fury to match the look of the two other boys who stood frozen still. Shocked. The greenette shoved past of them and grabbed his backpack before slinging it over his shoulder and jumping over Bakugo. In just a few seconds, the boy had dashed down the hallway and out of sight. As Bakugo fully sat upwards, he could only think one thing. What the fuck? Damn it! After the loud curse, there was the sound of thud. Izuku stood in a quiet and isolated ally. Using the same fist that he had stupidly punched Bakugo with, he had bashed it against the wall. After a moment of letting it sit there, a tiny trail of blood leaked from his recovered knuckle. As the distressed boy watched it slowly drip down the wall, he took deep and calming breaths. Almost as if the falling crimson was hypnotizing, Izuku regained his composure, taking his fist from the brick wall and bringing it close for him to inspect. With eyes that no longer had the cracks forming around it, he saw the scraped skin that was covered in blood. It was nothing new to him. Izuku was more distracted by the fact that he had slipped up. He didn't mean to punch Bakugo. He didn't even want to, but his Quirk had other ideas. Pulling himself out of his thoughts, he looked back to his hand. For a second time that day, it was unscathed. Deeply inhaling and exhaling, the greenette turned and walked out the ally. Making it to the open sidewalk it was connected to, Izuku found that he was in a more out-of-the-way part of town compared to the route he usually takes, meaning he had a longer walk to take if he wants to get home. Guess that's what he deserves for running away blindly. He was familiar with the place enough to know where to go. It just meant that he needed to take more alleyways if he decided that shortcuts were an option. Coming to a conclusion that they were, Izuku started his journey home. And just like that, he became one with the crowd. Walking alongside them as them, he really was just another regular teenage boy. He breathed like them, thought like them, ate like them, and looked like them, despite his unique eyes. Then again, a large portion of the people had physical properties that made them stand out, so Izuku really did look normal. The thought was almost humorous that nobody suspected a thing. Not a single soul even had a clue as to what lay underneath Izuku's skin. Even the boy himself wasn't sure. Coming to the entrance of another ally, Izuku turned into it and crossed into walkway where the only occupant was the green-haired boy. I thought I've gotten to the point where even Bakugo can't hurt me anymore. But then again, he's never told me to kill myself before. That idiot. Izuku said his thoughts out loud as he neared an underpass, ignoring the more frequent twitches of his arm. I would like to hope that by punching him he would back off a little, but knowing him, he trailed off on the last sentence as it was clear as day how the blonde would react the next time they meet. He was approaching the underpass now. Izuku continued to ignore the twitches that were becoming more of jerks as his arm looked like he was doing some very strange things in his pocket. On the very first step of going in, his left arm shot out from his pants where another sound of a thud followed. This time, there were noises of cracks and broken concrete mixed along with it. Spinning his head to see what happened, Izuku saw just what had caused the sound. His hand was embedded into the wall. For a moment he looked at it shocked. The tips of his fingers no longer had skin or flesh as his exposed distal phalanges were dug deep into the concrete. Where his bones have penetrated the wall, small cracks had etched in around it. Then, the boy's expression turned into that of annoyance. "Why are you that way that you are?" Izuku asked as if he were talking to a questionable friend who just did something stupid. "I don't understand why you can't just be normal," he said while placing a foot against the wall and using his other hand to grab onto his stuck wrist. After a particularly hard yank, all 5 of his fingers were freed. It was merely a quick shake of his hand before the exposed parts were recovered by everything that was supposed to be there. Flesh, blood, nerves, and skin. Deciding to walk in the middle of the tunnel and away from the walls as to prevent another spaz of his Quirk, he continued forward. Halfway there and nothing has happened so far. Good. Taking what should have been another step, Izuku heard possibly one of the most disgusting moist sounds in his life when he set down his left foot. Other than inwardly shivering and taking the initiative to not look at whatever he stepped in, he moved on without stopping. Only he couldn't. After nearly falling from his left foot not being there to move forward, Izuku whipped his head to his side and downwards to glare at whatever nasty substance some asshole just dumped here. That's not normal. The thick liquid that was stuck to the bottom of his shoe just so happened to be a near pitch-black green, raising the amount of grossness. Giving a stronger tug, he found that he was actually stuck. After a grueling discovery, Izuku saw that it was actually moving up his foot. Kicking it into double time, he kicked his leg in different directions to try and find leverage. But no matter what, his leg would not shift an inch as the slime was now up covering his ankle. It was then that Izuku saw exactly where the sludge was coming from. From the sewage lid he was standing on, the slime was pouring through the small holes. "Damn it! Get off me!" This time he tried twisting and jumping away, but to no avail. "I don't think I will." A chill ran down Izuku's spine when a gargled voice responded to his demand. With wide eyes, he looked back down to the lid just in time to see two large eyes slither through the holes and peer menacingly at him. Hello. Nope. Splat. Got Ara. The moment that Izuku used his free foot to stomp it down on one of the eyes, the slime retracted just enough for him to pull free and rush down the other end of the underpass. If that was any bigger indication that the slob with eyes was a villain, then Izuku didn't know what was. While he didn't consider himself to be weak, he was still far too young and inexperienced to ensure that there wouldn't be a risk of serious injuries. To the villain anyway. Izuku was just about to make it to the other end where there was a very short distance away from a main sidewalk where he would be able to call for help from a hero. And just where do you think you're going? Izuku cursed to himself as the plan was no longer an option when the slime villain shot past him and spreading out to his full size, completely taking any means of escape. The thing was much bigger than Izuku initially thought. It easily filled out the area of the underpass and very well could easily use itself to engulf several people. He could also see that it just didn't have eyes but also a large mouth with ugly teeth. Before Izuku could answer, not that he was going to anyway, a tendril shot out from the mass of goo that was heading straight for him. Without a second to spare, the target of the tendril just barely dodged to the right. He heard a grunt of irritation from the villain before it shot out another limb of slime before Izuku even had time to stop his previous dodge. Using his surroundings, Izuku kicked off the wall that he was close enough to, allowing him to safely evade the goo that splat on the spot he was just in not moments ago. It would have been a perfect dodge if it weren't in fact a trap. Much to his surprised annoyance, a third tendril swiped towards him at a low angle. It made a direct contact with his left leg that instantly tripped the boy into making him fall harshly to the ground on his back. Ignoring the pain as he always did, Izuku attempted to pull away from the grasp that was inevitably on his leg. He didn't so much as move an inch before he felt himself being quickly dragged along the dirty ground toward the scowling ball of slime. The closer he got, the more that scowl turned into an evil grin. I would love to play tag with you for a little bit longer, but I'm in quite the hurry. So, why don't you just do me a favor and quit struggling? Ha! Just as he finished talking, the villain felt great resistance with the boy. Looking again, he saw that the greenette looked to have his hand dug deeply into the ground. If you think I'm just gonna let you do whatever the hell it is you want with me, then you're sorely mistaken. Izuku tightened his grip, the ends of his exposed bone fingers latching into the concrete just as it had done before. Because of that, confusion was mixed in with his emotions as he felt the ground rumble slightly beneath him. Curse you, brat. I've already wasted enough time. Boom. Due to the odd angle Izuku was laying in, it took him a moment to turn himself just in time to see the sewage lid fall to the ground. The cracks that were on the ceiling indicated that it had smashed against it. But what was it that had caused it to fly off like that? Have no fear, young one, for you are safe now, because I am here. Before Izuku's very eyes, All Might stepped out from the manhole. A man of great importance and symbolization stood proud and strong on the other side of the underpass, the light from behind him making the hero look even more astonishing. The villain didn't seem to think the same thing. Dai! Almost immediately, a limb of sludge shot over Izuku's head and at the hero. Unlike the greenette, it was dodged with hardly any effort. Before the villain could even react to the failed attempt, All Might blasted off from his spot and charged the ball of slime. Another gooey attack was sent to intercept the hero. An attack that will be overshadowed momentarily. Texas, Smaeawash. In a booming voice, All Might called out one of his signature moves and threw a punch. His fist met nothing but air. And that air became a weapon. As if standing in the middle of a storm, magnificent winds rushed down the enclosed space and towards the two on the other end of it. Izuku felt it hit him first as he is closer. Thankfully, due to his angled position, the winds mostly blew over the top of his body. But that didn't mean he didn't feel the blast as his hold on the ground was nearly released and flown backwards. Izuku quickly put his head down with his other arm to protect himself. About just as the counterattack started, The boy felt the hold on his foot vanish, and the gargled yells of the villain behind him came soon after. In the midst of the gust, there was the sickening noise of the sludge spreading and hitting the walls all around him, ending the villain's cries. The wind died down. Along with it came the defeat of the sludge villain. Izuku slowly raised his head from the ground to look behind him. Indeed, the walls, floor, even the ceiling was covered with the same green goo. Despite the fact that it was rather gross and that the slime was most likely trying to kill him just a minute ago, it was an amazing sight. Remembering just exactly who it was that made such a scene, Izuku whipped his head back around to face a large pair of shoes. "Hello down there," the voice that originated above him called down with care. Looking up, the boy saw the number 1 hero was standing right in front of him. "I apologize for getting you caught up in my heroing. I usually do a better job at keeping civilians out of the way." Who knew that the sewage systems were so hard to navigate? In an instant, Izuku shot up from the ground. "No, All Might. I'm fine. You don't have to apologize or anything," the much smaller boy said while waving his arms around. He may not have been quite the same overly excited fanboy as he once was, but it was still exciting to see and have All Might in his presence, considering that he was still Izuku's favorite hero. The muscly adult seemed to process his words for a short moment before giving a strange look to his hand. "Yurm, that doesn't look fine." At the hero's words, Izuku looked to his hand to see that the tips of his bones were still exposed for the world to see. As soon as he realized this, he gave a sharp yelp before flinging his hand behind his back. "Oh, that's just my quirk. It doesn't hurt, I swear." After the mention of his quirk, Izuku managed to calm himself, although he was still slightly nervous. "You're sure? You sounded quite hesitant." All Might asked again. The greenette could see that his worry was genuine. "Felt nice." "Yes, All Might. See." Izuku pulled out his hand and showed it to the man who looked curious. It was completely normal. No bones, no red flesh, just normal skin. All Might leaned in a little closer with an impressed look as he rubbed his chin with one hand. That's a neat quirk you have there." Izuku grew a barely noticeable blush at the compliment that he wasn't used to as he turned away while rubbing the back of his head with his other hand. "Really? That's nothing much compared to what I can actually do, but if you say so." "You mean that you can do more?" At the question, Izuku tensed. "Crap. I wasn't supposed to say that. I'm not really comfortable talking about it." With the hand that he was presenting to the hero, he brought it back and held it close to his chest, changing his gaze to the ground in front of him. "Well, I won't pressure you into telling me, but just know, your quirk is your gift, and no one can change that." As he said the last sentence, All Might gave a confident thumbs up. It really did feel nice to be given this much positivity. Even though in reality, Izuku was certain that it would be All Might who wouldn't be comfortable after learning of his quirk. "Thanks. That means a lot." But even so, he felt the same. Do you want help picking up all this slime?" After a brief pause, Izuku offered his assistance to the hero, seeing as the villain was sort of all over the place. "No need, my boy." With just those 4 words, All Might was gone. Not even in a blur, just gone. The split second that it took Izuku to process that, he once more felt a gust of wind overcome him as he needed to shield himself with his arms and close his eyes. After feeling it subside, he opened his eyes to see All Might standing before him again. In both hands, he held 2 soda bottles that contained the villain as the boy saw the floating eye in one of them. "Tada! Wow!" At Izuku's reaction, All Might gave a hearty laugh. The smaller of the 2 was just on the verge of maybe joining in but was stopped short when the hero fell into a bout of coughing. "All Might, are you all right?" Yes, young man. Don't worry about me. Ahem. Just because I'm a hero doesn't mean I can't get a sore throat sometimes." Ha 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 ha. Again, Izuku couldn't help the fact that he was talking to the symbol of peace, so he took his word for it. "But I really must go. This villain won't turn himself in, you know? Right? Well, thanks for saving me." In his final words, Izuku gave a wave to the hero, walked out from underneath the underpass and crouched down low. All in a day's work. See ya around. In that last part, All Might shouted as he rocketed off the ground and into the sky. Izuku watched him go, his eyes following the figure of the man getting smaller and smaller before disappearing behind the horizon of tall buildings. It was a sight to see, and an experience he'll forever remember. The thought of maybe seeing if he could get an autograph crossed his mind during the interaction, but he decided against it. The conversation that followed instead was worth it to Izuku. Honestly, this was the first time in a while that he's felt this kind of pure joy. A smile placed itself firmly on his usually neutral expression. Too bad things never last. The smile slipped away as the thought crept into his mind. Really, thank you, All Might. If you hadn't saved me, I don't think I would have been able to control myself. Izuku's entire body burst into a jolt of twitches and jerks after letting go of the strain he's been holding the entire time. But as soon as it came, it was gone. The greenette stood there for a minute, both hands clamping the middle of his uniform while breathing heavily. After a few practices, his breath slowed and his heart calmed. The cracks that forced themselves around his eyes slowly subsided back into his voids. Ha 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 ha. Not this time. Chapter 2, Rattle Me. The woods went on forever. There never seemed to be an end. Then again, he never had enough time to find out. It didn't help that it was dark. The only source of light was from the pale moon above that was mostly blocked by the overhanging blanket of the trees. Any colors of the trees, plants, grass, anything that was present were all sapped of color in the near pitch-black darkness. Instead, everything came out as a barely seeable silhouette. It was a deathly quiet. No wind to gently shake the trees into a harmless dance. Not a single nocturnal entity to fill the night with its calls. Not even insects that chirped their endless songs. Silence. In these woods that looked like it would normally be home to many slumbering creatures and animals, not a single living thing resided on the plain. Except one. And the second didn't count. Izuku Midoriya was here. Again. Just as he's done hundreds of times before, he wandered the woods, taking in the scenes that were dull and the sounds that weren't even there. His footsteps didn't even make noise. He didn't know where to go or what to do. Not exactly anyway. He had an idea, but it was awful, and it always resulted in very random and unpredictable ends. Izuku was supposed to accomplish something here. It was the reason why he pulled himself back to this place. It was just so damn difficult that he's lost count of how many times he's had to return. It was getting to the point where he could recognize some of the trees from his previous visits. It was because of that he knew that he was getting farther than normal tonight. It didn't normally let him do that. Snap. Guess he spoke too soon. From the first sound and the echo of the night that followed behind Izuku, he probably had maybe 30 to 40 feet to work with. Not much considering that it only took the monster behind him hardly a second to clear that distance. Izuku felt his body begin to shake. But not from Quirk acting. He was afraid. Drops of sweat were already running down his face. Then came the second sound that filled Izuku's ears. His own heartbeat. It was currently skyrocketing. Izuku hated this inevitable feeling that came over him on nights like these. It wasn't because of the feeling per se, but the fact that he thought he would have been able to get used to this by now. It's happened to him dozens of times, over and over again. But no matter how higher the number got, it always felt like the first time he peered into those shining green eyes. Turning his head with every bit of courage he had, Izuku looked back at the second entity that occupied the woods. It was like looking in a mirror. Two pairs of eyes that were flawlessly identical stared at one another. The only difference being what the eyes were connected to. It was too dark to fully make out what was crouched low to the ground, but if Izuku's memory served him right, then the silhouette did very little to size up the real appearance of the monster. The moment Izuku saw those eyes dilate, he ran. And he didn't stop. He didn't need to. It would always catch him in the end. So, he didn't know why he was even running in the first place. Maybe it served as a metaphor in the deepest parts of the boy's mind of when he used to just sit there and take the pain. Maybe he just didn't want to give up. Maybe he was a coward for running. Maybe it didn't matter. Although no sound was again no longer present in the woods, Izuku could feel the monster closing in on him. They were one after all. The last thing that happens before Izuku's world becomes completely black is the split-second pain of sharp points crushing his neck. Izuku! Inko called out her son's name the moment she burst into his room. The smaller greenette that's sitting on his bed yelped for second time from having the mother charging in. Mom! Mom! It's all right. I'm fine, see? Before Inko could run over to his bed, Izuku had raised his arms up into a stopping motion and gave an apologetic smile that served to be reassurance. Sweetie, are you sure? I could hear you from the kitchen. She was still worried, but at least managed to lower her excitement. Composing herself enough, she saw what the reason for her son's brief yell had possibly been. You were trying it again, weren't you? Inko asked after seeing that Izuku had his legs crossed and sitting square in the middle of his bed. The main indications that he was meditating. I have to. Otherwise, I'll make zero progress. Izuku didn't meet her eyes as he answered. He knew how much it worried his mother every time he went to the strange woods. It was bad enough that his quirk affected the real world, but ever since Inko learned that it was terrorizing his mind, she grew ever more wishful to help. Did anything new happen? Inko's question slightly surprised Izuku. She didn't normally ask, but it would seem that she's becoming more supportive. It was just too bad that the worst outcome happened this time. Just another fail, he said with little effort to hide the annoyance and frustration in his voice, the previous fear and dread fading away. I got kind of far this time, but not before. Yeah. I know you'll figure it out someday, Izuku. The younger greenette matched his eyes with his mother that had walked the rest of the way to his bed to hold his hands in hers. Because if you're the same son that I've been raising for the last 14 years, then I know for a fact you'll overcome it. And I'll be there every step along the way. Her words were nothing but kind. The sort of love that only a parent could give. Inko bent over to plant a kiss on Izuku's head, who blushed under the affection that revealed his embarrassment. That didn't mean he didn't like it, though. Thanks, Mom. They shared a smile before the mother left the room and her worries, also leaving Izuku to his thoughts. The memory of his experience in the woods today was like many others. Apart from the end, it was identical to the rest. Ever since the age of 6, where he first slipped into a state of relaxed meditation, he's learned that he could enter a plane that resided in the figment of his imagination. Except that the plane was not under his control, nor did he have normal means to leave. All he could do was walk through the woods until it sent him back, whether it being thrown out without warning or when he was killed. He had no idea how to explain it. All he knew was that it was him and the monster that was alone in those woods. Depending at random, their interactions differed. Some days, it would just leave him alone and not even show signs of its presence. Those were the times that Izuku got the farthest. On others, it would follow him, as if it were studying him or just curious. That was when Izuku could always spot its glowing green eyes peering at him from a distance. And then there were the special nights. It would just happen out of nowhere, as if someone just flipped a switch. Without hesitation, it would hunt him down and force him out of the dark plane. He knew that today was one of those the moment he saw those eyes on him when he turned around. Izuku growled with annoyance as he flopped backwards onto his bed, as if his quirk wasn't problematic as it was from the beginning, but now he has to deal with freaky mental states of what were supposed to be relaxation to most people but to him were odd chances of exploration or sudden death. Even though Izuku's quirk has basically killed him in his sleep once more, it was just another day. On the hand that had Izuku's head resting on it, his pointer finger was repetitively tapping against his cheek. But this wasn't his quirk being annoying this time. This was Izuku being somewhat nervous for the events that were about to unfold. He took another glance to his left where his eyes briefly landed on the sandy blonde-haired boy known as Katsuki Bakugo. And he was staring right back with eyes that made Izuku think the explosive teen was actually about to kill someone. He still had a patch on his nose. Today was Monday. Izuku punched Bakugo straight in the face on Friday and fled right after. For 2 days, Bakugo has been most likely building up that anger to get revenge on the day that was today. So far, Izuku has managed to avoid him entirely on sheer dumb luck. but as that one saying goes, his luck would run out. However, before Izuku was going to let that happen, he did some running of his own just as the final bell rang that signaled the end of the school day. With the bag that he already had packed, he slipped that straps over his shoulders and rushed out the door. He hated himself for basically running away like he used to when he was younger, but he really did not feel like being caught in Bakugo's bullshit at the moment. He smoothly maneuvered through the thick crowd of the other students, but not on his usual route. Doing anything to ensure that the fuming blonde couldn't find was what he needed. Taking the doors that he's actually never used before, Izuku took a different path to get away from the school grounds without being spotted. He figured the more unused school ally way would be good. As far as he knew, no one ever used it. It wasn't even an ally, just a thin space between the school and the wall separating the grounds next door. That didn't mean the school didn't decide to completely waste and put up a rather unnecessary koi pond. The same koi pond that Izuku found ironically just below the same window that Bakugo threw his notebook out of last week. Speaking of the koi pond. Thud. Just as the greenette was about to pass the little aquarium, his Quirk came up with the decision to be an asshole and make his outstretched leg jerk outwards to where his foot caught the edge of the structure. Therefore, he fell. But if living with a power that made him involuntarily clumsy taught him anything, it was to prevent himself from ever completing those falls. Grabbing the edge of the koi pond with quick reactions, Izuku managed to pull himself up and regain his balance. Concluding that he would try to slap the monster out of spite later, he continued to trudge down the small path. The only problem was, oh damn it! At the very end of the alley were two people. Taking a second to recognize their faces, Izuku identified them to be the same two boys that were missing from class today. Scowling in aggravation, Izuku quickly turned to go the other way. Maybe there was still an opening that he could use without running into Baku. Go. What's wrong, Deku? You look lost. Want some redirection? Bakugo had a maniacal grin as he slowly walked down the alley from where Izuku had come. You need help, Bakugo. If you're seriously going to force other classmates to skip school just to track me down and get back at me, then you need to get your priorities straight. Seeing as there was no way to escape, Izuku went the route of trying to talk down the seething blonde. You're going to need help in a couple seconds. Bakugo spat back with words that promised an inevitable confrontation. You actually had the balls to hit me, and then just run away like a little bitch. Where's that fight you had in you now? Huh? Just gonna run away like you always do. You pathetic, useless, weak, creepy fuck? That really pisses me off. You think that just because you got in a lucky hit that you don't even have to defend yourself against me? Are you looking down on me, you bastard? With every shout, the blonde kept getting closer. His steps becoming stomps and his questions being served with small explosions to emphasize his rage. But as a matter of fact, Izuku could answer that last question easily. Yes. The greenette's blunt answer caused the taller boy to falter for a second. Of course I do. Izuku exchanged his expression of upset concern to flat anger. Bakugo, you have an amazing quirk, but your personality and attitude are fucking awful. You hurt others for the simple enjoyment of making yourself look and feel better. Any real friends that you used to have in the past left long ago because of it, including me. How can I respect that? You want to be a hero, yet you treat people like a villain. For anyone to not look down on you must have hella low standards. So yeah, I do look down on you, Katsuki. Oh, how long Izuku's wanted to say those words to the blonde's face. Speaking of his face, Bakugo had many mixed emotions swimming in his red eyes. The first noticeable ones were bewilderment and surprise. The feelings of fury and rage were just behind but building fast. Like a literal explosion, Bakugo burst into a fit of anger. I'll be looking down at you when I put your ass 6 feet under. Using actual explosions, Bakugo blasted forth with surprising speed. It was almost enough to catch Izuku off guard as the long distance between them was closed barely over a second. However, if the greenette wasn't expecting what was coming next, then Bakugo very well could have landed a hit. Izuku ducked the obvious right punch that went sailing over his head and dashed to the right where his back met the wall of the school. The human rocket slid across the ground for a few feet before spinning around and attempting another attack. The same right punch came straight for Izuku's head, who jerked to the right once more as the explosion charred the wall where he just was. Taking the chance, Izuku grabbed the blonde's outstretched arm by the wrist and pulled. Hearing a gasp from Bakugo, Izuku used his other hand to push against his shoulder, causing the taller teen to trip and fall to the ground. Just as quickly as he was on the dirty concrete, he was back up again with imaginary steam shooting from his ears. Charging towards the green-eyed boy, Bakugo leapt upward this time before sending out a kick with momentum that was increased using even more explosions. He figured it would have been fast enough to connect, but once again, Izuku barely dodged just in the nick of time. How is this little shit evading me this easily? He's nothing but a weakling. How? Deku, get back here and stop running from me. Deku. The target of the demand did not listen as he jumped backwards away from the ever-progressing blonde. That was when Red Eyes widened in realization. Izuku was on the opposite side of him. The side that the little runt had come from and where no one was standing at the end of the alley. Izuku was trying to run again, taking small, unnoticeable actions to get him closer to the end to try and escape. Like hell I'm gonna let that happen. Bakugo saw Izuku's eyes widen as the blonde used his quirk to launch him into the air and over the stunned greenette. The latter of the two must have realized that their plan was discovered and made a last attempt to bolt for it. Knowing that his aggressive classmate would do anything at this point to ensure that he got what he wanted, Izuku just had to do the same thing for him to get out of here without a real fight breaking out. It was too dangerous for the both of them. He ran as fast as he could with Bakugo flying through the air above him, a number of explosions getting closer and faster. Izuku couldn't afford to let this happen. The twitches in his body were getting more frequent and stronger. It was hard enough to ran at the moment when nearly every joint in his body was jerking against his will. He could feel it trying to push itself out to act against Bakugo rather than run. No matter what, he couldn't let that happen. Bakugo landed directly in front of him. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to slow. Red eyes were wide with insanity, as was his grin. Green eyes were wide with horror. He was too close. Bakugo was too close for Izuku to try and dodge. An open palm with the scent of nitroglycerin was already heading straight for him, and Izuku was heading right into it. With a smack, Bakugo's hand slapped against Izuku's face, his fingers curling harshly on his skull. "Let's see how you like it." Bakugo's voice was that of a sinister whisper. The explosion that followed was anything but a whisper. A deep boom mixed with hissing sparks shook the ground. A shockwave of power rushed down the alley like a flowing river as the two kids who were standing there were nearly knocked off their feet from the unexpected winds. Bakugo felt satisfaction at feeling the head in his grasp jerk back from the unstoppable force and even fly backwards. A loud crash came just after the greenette's form was hidden in the smoke caused by Bakugo's large explosion. However, there was a sense of regret with that satisfaction. He had just used his quirk at a much higher level of power than he meant. Not to mention that he used it point-blank on someone. "Deku, I swear, if your pathetic ass gets me in trouble for this, I'll make it even worse next time," the blonde said to himself just as the smoke was beginning to clear. Once it did, the image was fully revealed. That crash he heard was Izuku colliding with the koi pond. His body was embedded into the side of it with broken bricks and cement blocks scattered on the ground. Flowing past him was the water of the pond that was leaking from the damaged parts. He was sitting on the ground with his back curled backwards and his head nearly dipping into the sinking water below so Bakugo couldn't see his face. But he could see the smoke rising from it. "Shit, I think I overdid it a little." Bakugo quickly walked over to find out if he could get away with this. He couldn't give two shits about the black-eyed fucker, but if he were to go to a teacher about this, then the evidence of burn marks would be undoubtedly traced back to him. He stopped when he got to the edge of the pond and leaned over. He started to see Izuku's chin, then the base of his bottom lip. After that was... Fuck! After that was an unforgettable patch of roasted skin and even flesh. His nose was at a strange angle, most likely from the force of his explosion. The green hair that normally spiked up messily around his head was singed away at the front. His mouth was slightly open, but that was mostly because his upper lip was gone. Bakugo failed to notice that his teeth were pristine. And his eyes were wide open, like his eyelids were burnt away. Probably the most disturbing thing was that his green pupils were gone. Bakugo had no idea what to make of that, if it meant he was dead or not, but the blonde was really starting to freak out. He fucked up. Plain and simple. He fucked up bad. Bakugo was beginning to sweat more than he usually did as his mind raced a mile a minute. Damn it, Deku. You better get your ass up. You hear me? The blonde hissed through clenched teeth. Yo, what happened? One of the teens yelled from down the alley. They were just far away enough to not see the results of Bakugo's outburst on the greenette. And he planned to keep it that way. Yeah. His dumbass is beat pretty good. Him and I are gonna talk some more, so get the hell out of here. Bakugo tried to pull of a smirk, but it came out as more of a grimace. Thankfully, neither seemed to notice or care as they shrugged and walked off. Maybe they just didn't care about what happened to Izuku. Who would, after all? Nobody cares about Deku. Just a little freaky-eyed nerd with a useless quirk. No one would miss him. Yeah, no one would even realize he's gone. That's right. But what about Auntie Inko? Bakugo hasn't seen her in years, as a matter of fact. There's no way that she could connect this to him, right? Wait, what was he even saying? He's thinking about hiding a body. Holy shit. Bakugo was on the brink of having an anxiety attack. His breaths were outpacing his heartbeat and sweat was dripping as fast as the still leaking water from the pond. He finally looked down to check one last time to see if Izuku was alive, and he just wasn't overthinking this. And he was looking right back at him. The world around Bakugo faded away in the background. Only he, the pond, and Izuku's lifeless eyes existed. The green pupils were still gone, but that didn't change the fact that his head was elevated to look straight at Bakugo. The latter yelped from fright when Izuku lurched forward without moving anything else to warn that he's going to move. It caused the blonde to trip over his own foot when jumping backwards and falling on his ass. Quickly setting his gaze back on the shorter teen, Bakugo saw that he was now standing in front of him. But how? It was as if he just lifted from the floor or some invisible force stood him up. Either way, Izuku was very much alive. For several seconds that were filled with anticipation and the sound of the water that was no just a dribble, they only looked at one another. Or at least Bakugo thought Izuku was looking at him. His freaky voids were still empty but aimed right at him. Then he took a step. Bakugo had been in enough fights to know what a wind-up for a kick looked like, but that knowledge didn't save him from the front of Izuku's shoe smashing right up against his gut. Gahak! The yell/cough of pain escaped Bakugo's lips before he could even register that the kick had already sent him tumbling halfway down the alley. After finally coming to a stop with scrapes, already forming bruises, and an incoming feeling to throw up, Bakugo grunted with effort to sit himself up. Laying on his left side, he propped himself up with his left elbow. He hissed in pain when he realized that he must have landed on that too as it throbbed upon contact with the concrete. He pulled through in the end and managed to lift his head up enough to look back at Izuku. The greenette still stood there, but that wasn't what caused Bakugo to gasp with disturbance and shock. All the wounds that he had previously vanished. His top lip was back to reform a neutral expression. His nose was correctly shaped as it should be, and any other deformities were fixed. The skin looked smooth and pale, just as it had been before. Even his fucking hair looked normal. But his eyes. His goddamn eyes. Just like on Friday, they had deep black cracks forming from his sockets like jagged streams. Still no trace of his green pupils in sight. Bakugo's own eyes were dragged to the shorter teen's right arm. The spastic jerks and twitches had caught his attention as it was the only thing moving on the greenette. He continued to watch it with horrified awe as his arm raised upward in front of its owner. Then, much to his disgust, terror, revulsion, and astonishment, the very skin peeled away from muscle. That was the next to go. The strands of muscle fiber seemingly detached itself and almost looked to deteriorate. No, it melted, decayed, shriveled, withered. It was just gone. All that was left was an intact skeletal hand. The feeling of sickness was no longer just from the impact in his gut, but more from the sickening scene of flesh slithering away to reveal Izuku's bones underneath. Even without anything logically holding them together, they stayed in place to take the shape of a hand. Just when Bakugo thought things couldn't get weirder, it did. The bones changed. They shifted and morphed. Sounds of snaps and popping bones could be heard as the white objects did what they weren't normally supposed to do. The tips became longer and pointed, as if it were growing claws. On the knuckles, short spikes emerged that pulled backwards. But overall, the bones thickened. They got larger and bulkier than any normal skeleton should. By the time it finally stopped, Izuku's skeletal hand was nearly as thick as if it were his actual hand. Bakugo couldn't imagine if the same thing was going on all the way up his arm. Was this his quirk? Has Izuku been hiding it from everyone this whole time? How and why? That was when Izuku's eyes reappeared. They were exactly the same, down to the last detail. Nothing has changed except for the cracks that were nearly passed all the way down his cheeks. But by no means did they feel the same. For as long as Bakugo could remember, Izuku's eyes were always emitting a kind of aura, a feeling that did nothing other than to make you want to look twice. But now, they were haunting. Those tiny little green dots held not a single spark of emotion, yet their aura gave a monstrous presence. Bakugo even thought that they shined brighter. It was completely unnerving when Izuku didn't so much as blink or even look anywhere else other than at Bakugo's red eyes. It was like he was in a trance. Izuku started to walk. Bakugo at long last pulled himself out of his own trance and quickly stood up. The sore spots on his body that weren't any more that bumps had started to fade, but it still hurt like hell. At this point, he was deciding between staying to fight or just swallow his pride and get the fuck out of there. Everything about what he was looking at was off. Something told him in the back of his mind that this was serious. Izuku took steps that were too robotical. Nothing about his movements wasted more energy than necessary. The skeletal hand hung low at his side. Pointed fingers curled inward to make a clawing motion. Is Deku seriously thinking about fighting me? Is this even Deku? In Bakugo's frantic thoughts, he still was of yet to come to the conclusion of running or seeing what would happen if he stayed. When Izuku got halfway, the decision was made for him. Bakugo barely had any time to react as the greenette was suddenly running at him with speed that he didn't know the shorter teen was capable of. Just as Izuku had done, Bakugo ducked underneath the outstretched skeletal hand that cut through a few strands of his hair. The dodge left Bakugo in a limbo position, but unlike him, Izuku didn't go sailing past when the attack didn't connect. Bakugo was more than shocked to see Izuku pivot on one heel and twist around to where his left elbow came up and down right in the middle of his chest. That's twice that Bakugo had been thrown to the ground effortlessly. With a new difficulty to breath from the air being knocked out of his lungs, he had problems getting it back. Except he couldn't do that before he had to roll out of the way before Izuku's hand made of bone smashed into the ground just where the blonde's head was just a split second prior. Being quicker in his movements, Bakugo got to his feet almost immediately. Just as he did, the same fist that was an inch into the hard concrete flung up and struck him in the chest for a second time with a backhand, the spiked knuckles lightly raking across his torso. The force behind it was enough to send Bakugo airborne and colliding against the wall of the school. He wasn't even able to land back on his feet before the hand clamped roughly around his throat, holding him in place as his legs dangled inches from the ground. In the span of a few seconds, the bully had become the bullied as Bakugo could only choke past the tight hold on his neck. This was no longer a scuffle between two teens. This was a fight for survival. Bakugo's fearful grimace morphed into a fierce scowl before he took both his hands and placed them firmly on Izuku's forearm. Activating his quirk, the blonde unleashed countless explosions onto his limb. The continuous flashes of bright orange and sounds of booms left his senses irritated. His eyes greatly wanting to close themselves off from the bright light and to cover his ears from the bangs. Despite Bakugo's own adaptations to his quirk, this was a harsh punishment that was affecting him even though he wasn't the one receiving it. Finally, it stopped. Bakugo put an end to his onslaught of blasts but did not let go of the arm that was still horrifyingly clutched to his throat. The smoke faded, and red eyes met green. Nothing. It did nothing. Bakugo's heart plummeted at the sight of seeing that Izuku looked completely unaffected. The uniform sleeve that the blonde had a hold of was burned away into ashes. Now, all he held was a bulky skeletal arm that reached up to Izuku's elbow until small strands of muscle and flesh reached from a normal upper arm. The cracks around his voids never seemed to stop growing as they were now covering most of his face. The blonde saw Izuku raise his free arm outwards behind him. The haunting realization came when Bakugo saw the exterior of his hand do the same process of melting away to reveal a second hand made of bone. Just as it did with Izuku's right, the skeletal figures shifted into a beastly limb. Only bending his elbow, Izuku pointed his left arm at Bakugo. He was preparing to strike him. Bakugo thrashed harder against the unbreakable hold on his neck, not giving a shit about the sharp, pointed fingers digging into his skin. Izuku brought his arm back further. His other set of claws flexed to strike. The teen that was driven up against the wall entered a last state of flight or fight. And seeing as the first option wasn't even an option, he resorted to taking his hands of the limb of bone and use his left hand to grab roughly at Izuku's uniform collar and cock back his own open palm, the back of his arm flat against the brick wall. Again, the greenette was not affected by this display. Deku, if you don't knock whatever shit this is this instant, you're gonna need more than a whole lot of fucking calcium to fix this damn bone fuckery you got going on here. It wasn't the best of threats, but it was all he could come up with at the moment with the oddity of Izuku's apparent quirk and the choke on his neck. No reaction. Bakugo narrowed his eyes. Izuku launched his hand forward. Bakugo did the same with aggressive pops of his quirk. A song. Both hands stopped just short of reaching each other's faces. Bakugo was pressing his head against the wall as much as he could to prevent the white tips from grazing against his skin. Izuku remained emotionless, even with the parade of firecrackers going off in his face. As the two stared one another down, a song of some sort played from unknown origins. It was mellow and the voice was that of a woman's soft voice. From what Bakugo could tell, it was coming directly from behind Izuku. There wasn't any more time to think about it before Bakugo caught the first sign of emotion in those green eyes. Out of nowhere, Izuku suddenly looked mortified. The grasp on Bakugo's neck is released as he is finally able to take his first full breath in the last minute. Dropping to his knees and gently holding his own throat for protection, Bakugo coughed away the pain in his neck. With the sound of a thud, the blonde looked up from the ground to see Izuku up against the opposite wall. As he slid down to sit, he held out his arms before him, looking at them both with horror. Then the strained screams came. Bakugo had no idea what he was looking at, but from he could tell, Izuku was being tortured by something unseen. He twisted in place and kicked his legs back and forth. The movement of his arms were unmatched to the rest of his body. Instead, they jerked around and bent at odd angles. Sounds of bone cracking and popping came like a chorus. His fingers all twitched and not single one was in the same position. Izuku sounded like he was doing everything he could to keep his yells from escaping past the ally while struggling against the invisible attack on his body. His wild eyes chased the space around him, looking to the left for not even a second before jerking his attention elsewhere. Bakugo had no idea what he was witnessing. To him, it looked like a full-on possession. The mood of it all became scarier with the song of the woman still playing in the background. It was after a minute of watching that the blonde found something. The bones were changing again. The skeletal limbs that were far from human were shifting back to the normal skeleton that Bakugo was familiar with. Sharp pointed fingers became nubs. Jagged knuckles flattened out. The thick bones thinned back to normal proportions. Once everything was set in place, the exposed bone was slowly being recovered by meat, muscle, nerves, blood, and skin. Besides the growls and grunts from the teen that currently had this happening on his body, Bakugo could hear the noises of all this happening. The wet slithering of flesh across smooth bone, the stretching skin as it expanded over the entirety of his hand. And strangely enough, normal human nails popped up from nowhere to take their respectful place on the end of his fingers. The moment that happened, the greenette's arms fell limp to his sides. However, his struggles didn't cease quite yet. The cracks around his eyes were still in the process of shrinking and reverting back into his voids. The inky black trails slowly crawled across his face until they were no more, like dozens of snakes slithering into the same hole. When the last crack was no more, the pained yells went along with it. Izuku's head fell without anything to follow. It was as if he passed out on the spot. The music stopped. Bakugo could do nothing but stare. He wasn't sure if he should do anything. He wasn't sure if he wanted to do anything. But maybe he didn't have to. Izuku raised his head at a snail's pace. It was slow but steady when their eyes locked on to each other's. Those green irises looked so drained and tired. Bakugo, the owner of the name, flinched when his name was said from the other teen. If you don't say anything, then I won't. What you saw today will stay in the deepest parts of your mind where they will never see the light of day again to be spoken from your tongue. Do you understand? Izuku's voice was full of authority and control. It left hardly any room for the blonde to argue. Not that he wanted to anyway. "Tsh," was all he said before breaking eye contact and hiding his face by looking downward. Whatever. Bakugo wanted to ask so many questions. He wanted to beat them out of the boy. He couldn't do it though. Not only was he fatigued and sore from the short battle, but he was too afraid to ask right now. He just wouldn't admit it. "I'll take that as a yes." Izuku's voice was more relaxed now, even if it sounded like he was on the verge of going into a deep sleep. From the top of his vision, Bakugo saw the other teens stand on wobbly feet and begin to walk away. Once again, Bakugo was left feeling defeated. But this time, fear had taken root. Inko couldn't have been more anxious. It was way past the time that Izuku usually got home. She knew that he never took detours or different routes. Not only has this happened once, but twice. The same thing happened just last Friday, but Izuku absolutely refused to tell her what had happened. Maybe she was over worrying, although how could she not? Her son lived in a dangerous world, and with a quirk like his, it could easily lead to some complicated situations. It only got worse when he didn't answer her call. She remembered that he, funnily enough, had it set to make the ringtone of her favorite song when it was specifically her calling. If that was the case, then something must have happened to prevent him from picking up. Her stress just continued to rise the more minutes that passed. In a second, she also rose from the couch when she heard the front door open. Moving exponentially quick, she raced around the corner to see none other than her son that she had been fretting over for the past hour. But the sight did little to relieve her. Mom. I messed up." Chapter 3. Unfortunate. All Inko wanted was for her son to grow up into a strong, independent man and achieve his dreams. She used her own time to help him reach the goals that he has set for himself in this large and dangerous world. She'll continue to do until he meets them, or she'll die trying. Maybe that sounds a little extreme, but she means it. Inko was proud of Izuku from the very first day they met each other's eyes. Ever since then, he's amazed time and time again. Her little boy made great strides with each confident step he made. He did things Inko knew that she would never be capable of. From day one of learning what a hero was, that had been his #1 goal. To use his quirk that Inko has heard so many people call strange or weird or even freaky, and show how great he can become. However, it was difficult sometimes. Inko loved her son unconditionally, and that will never change. She sees his true intentions for kindness and selflessness. His yearning to help and aid others whenever they cannot do it for themselves. If only Izuku's quirk had the same mindset. Inko hated this part of herself. The part that is fearful of what she saw that night 10 years ago. The small green dots that reappeared in Izuku's eyes were not her son's. Even if they seemed to display dead emotions, Inko knew that they only desired chaos. An unnatural creature of calamity got its first taste of destruction that night and ever since has been crying for more. It was by some miracle that it didn't last long. It was also a miracle that her car even worked after that experience. The smashed parts, dents, deep gashes all littered the poor vehicle as it was pathetically driven back to her home with an unconscious Izuku in her lap. Inko didn't know exactly what had caused it to suddenly stop, but she was glad it did. Her son does not remember a thing from his manifestation. To him, I was all but a forgotten dream, but not to Inko. In this world, She is the only person to know just what a monster that his Quirk is. She is the only one to know this kind of fear. That is the part that Inko hates, where she cannot help. It's impossible not to notice his uncontrollable twitches, the sudden jerks of his body that has more or less caused him to break something once or twice. It was a constant battle for control in the small Midoriya's body. One that Izuku's been winning for the past 10 years. And for that past time, there wasn't a day that Inko searched her son's eyes for whatever that lay beneath to burst out. But as always, she only finds the comforting look of the boy that she's been raising for 14 years. A boy that is gentle yet strong. He was smarter than what he let on. A lot more analytical than he realized. Again, Inko was proud of her child. The only problem was that he lied. The green-haired mother had her narrow eyes trained on the damaged uniform in her hands. She inspected the fine details of the school clothes of her son. The black cloth that lay in her hold was wrinkled. The right sleeve was gone and replaced by rips and tears close to the shoulder. Around the neck and shoulders, there were the tiniest hints of ash and singe marks. Izuku wouldn't have noticed it with the marks being right under his nose. For whatever reason, the back of his shirt, his backpack, and most of his pants were soaking wet. The last two items were currently being cleaned. The noise of the washing machine was paired with the sound of the shower running, where Izuku had retreated to after explaining what had happened to him. A dog attack, huh? Inko echoed the summary of what had caused Izuku to be late getting home. She didn't want to doubt her son, but she also didn't want him to lie to her. Inko brought the shirt up to her face and stopped it just an inch from her nose. Taking a small sniff, she wasn't surprised to catch the smell of smoke. Again. The hell happened to you? Bakugo flinched under the commanding voice of his mother. It was expected that he wouldn't be able to hide his state from his parents, but the fact that Mitsuki was on him the moment he came through the door was one hell of a surprise that he didn't enjoy. Bakugo stood in doorway with his conditions being no better than what he left the school alleyway in. His ruffled uniform barely hid his sore body full of bruises that came from his crash when Izuku kicked him over at least 20 feet away. There were also the short cuts along his chest when the other teen had backhanded him against the wall. His uniform took most of the sharp punishment, but Bakugo still felt the full force of the attack. His stomach still hurt most of all with the feeling of puking his lunch following him the entire way home. Bakugo didn't even bother to check his neck that most definitely have marks from the greenette's weird ass-bone hands. His mother would most likely think that he got into a fight again. Are those hickeys? Mitsuki's sudden outburst threw Bakugo for a loop at the fact that the blonde woman assumed that he was doing rather inappropriate actions. What? Fuck no, they aren't goddamn hickeys, you hag. The smaller of the two challenged the other in the inevitable shouting contest that has become a custom in the house. As the two started to get into it, Masaru, Bakugo's dad, looked on with the hope that his assistance wouldn't be necessary to break them apart. Despite the single event that took place in the alley, things resumed as if nothing had happened. The days of school were all the same, with work, studying, and activities. The days altogether combined into weeks that would finish with relaxing weekends before returning back on Monday. Those soon became months that blurred together into a cycle of repetition. All along the way, Izuku and Bakugo would avoid each other. Nobody seemed to notice it at first. However, the times that it came for the class to make fun of the weak Deku, they found that the explosive blonde took no part. Not even turning his gaze away from his desk, where he now remained most of the time. Izuku both liked and disliked this. It was nice to finally not have Bakugo shouting profanities and demeaning insults down his neck for a majority of the day. But it was also a bad thing because Izuku knew that the red-eyed teen was either thinking or waiting. Sure, he must have questions. Many questions. And Izuku wasn't going to answer a single one of them. That was why he didn't like it. Bakugo was sure to come back for him one day to spill anything and everything. The greenette just hoped that he's able to keep his cool this time. It was about 4 months after their fight behind the school. Just like every day for those past 4 months, Izuku left the buildings without any distractions from Bakugo or anyone else. Sporting a brand new uniform that the school provided for him, Izuku walked his merry way back home. Learning from his previous mistakes, he kept to the more populated areas. It was more to keep his mom from having a heart attack rather than actually keeping himself safe. These days, Izuku wasn't too worried about his safety. The walk was silent and short. The travel that consisted of making his way down the sidewalk along with tons of other people was a newfound routine for the green-haired boy. The sun that was just starting to enter its setting phase emitted just a hint of warm orange with the calming blue in the sky. Almost no clouds were present to better portray the refreshing sense of the summer air. All around him, people moved with motives in mind, just as he did. The chorus of their footsteps blended into the surrounding sounds of the city. It was peaceful. Well, about as peaceful as it can get for Izuku. The random twitches around his body made it apparent that peace was never an option. No use in complaining, however. It came to a point where Izuku entered the more urban area of Mizutofu where his house gave everything he needed. The noises of the busy city soon faded away and was replaced by the more subtle sounds of the passing vehicle of the chirps of birds. His footsteps were no longer accompanied by the dozens of others, as he was now alone on the thinner sidewalk. The home that has sheltered him for his entire life came into view as he turned onto another short sidewalk that took him to the tall apartment building. He headed up the few flights of stairs and walked down the open aisle that guided him straight to the front door. Upon opening it and entering, he voiced his arrival. "I'm home," Izuku gently shouted into the small apartment. "Welcome home, sweetie. Are you hungry?" Inko relayed her usual response and question just a moment later, during which Izuku dropped his bag by the door and headed to the kitchen where he found Inko. "Yeah, watcha making?" Izuku asked curiously as he peeked over Inko's shoulder. He wasn't able to process it quite yet before the smell of it made his mouth water. "I made katsudon for you since you aced your test yesterday," Inko replied with a proud and cheerful smile. Izuku returned a small smile before gaining a look of confused thought. "But I pass all my tests. Does this mean I get katsudon for each one now?" Izuku gave an uncommon show of humor in his question as he and Inko lightly chuckled. "I guess you could say that. This is for all of it." Inko turned back to the pot before and Izuku set his eyes on his mother with a raised eyebrow. "Izuku, I can't possibly tell you how proud I am in the human vocabulary. I was worried about you, to be honest. But look at you now." Inko looked back up to share their gaze with green eyes. "You're becoming such a fine young man. And I don't have a doubt in my mind you will become a fantastic hero." Izuku really couldn't keep himself from smiling under his mother's loving words. It didn't matter if he's heard them many times before. It will always make him feel warm. The boy wrapped his arms around Inko into a sideways hug. Inko easily embraced her son as she curled an arm around to hold his shoulder. For a few seconds, they stayed like that. It wasn't too often anymore that they hugged like this, with the both of them being as busy as they were. "Heh, you know, I can't tell you how thankful I am in the human vocabulary," Izuku said after a short period of silence. Inko huffed amusingly and tilted her head back to look at him with disbelief and a smirk. "Hey, that's my original work. Get your own." Inko laughed during the statement as she lightly started pinching the boy with the arm she had around him. The target of these relentless pinches giggled while breaking free from the hold and jumping away towards the hallway. "Now go get ready for dinner," she commanded between laughs as he disappeared behind the corner. The mother continued to chuckle to herself for a few more seconds as she resumed her cooking. Meanwhile, Izuku had sent himself to his room. A decent space with all of his possessions along with a decent amount of hero-themed items met him as he started with the progress of readying himself. A smile could still be seen on his lips during the time. It was impossible to keep his neutral expression around his mother. She was simply too sweet and kind for this world. He couldn't imagine what a better mother would be. It was his mission to become strong enough to protect her from anything and anyone. Strangely, Izuku's neck jerked aggressively downwards, causing his head to nearly tap his chest with his chin. It would have looked like he was nodding at something if her didn't jerk back up with a grimace on his face. A hiss of pain came with the action of sticking his tongue out to show that he had accidentally bitten it. The rest of the night went without a hitch. It was a relaxing dinner where the two Midoriyas ate their food and summoned small talk. Another normal day went on that ended on a normal evening that drifted into a dark sky that signaled the beginning of night. Once Greenette bid the other good night as well as vice versa. And so the daily cycle was complete. Almost. On a concrete sidewalk that was only illuminated by the streetlights above, a single occupant roamed its provided path. The bottom of their rough shoes repetitively met the hard ground where their destination would soon come into view. The exterior of their dark clothes bathed in the pale orange glow from the lights above. Their figure cast a shadow on the ground before them that mimicked their every step towards their goal. His light footsteps were the only sound that tapped against the dead silence that the night brought. The thickness of his apparel kept the growing cold from bothering him as his easy breaths let out the smallest puff of his hot breath in the chilly air. His hands were dug deep into his pockets even though he wore thick protective gloves. In the tight hold of his right hand, he held the second object that he brought with him other than the clothes he wore. Streetlight after streetlight he kept moving. His light brown eyes scanned the area around him. Each passing house was quickly thrown into the back of his mind as he looked to the next in search of the one he was looking for. Soon enough, one particular building came into view. He came to the conclusion that it'll have to do. For a decent amount of time, he traversed up and down the aisles, inspecting the several doors that he passed by before moving up a floor. There, he would repeat the process, letting his quirk feed him information on what came from the inside. So far, nothing greatly interested him. He wasn't too picky, but this was ridiculous. There. The man stopped at once in front of one door that matched every single other door on the building. Nothing about was special in any way other than the few number address on it. No, it was what was behind the door that interested him. A small smile came upon his face. While it was one satisfaction, there was also contemplation. After all, he couldn't be careless in his profession. Coming to a final decision, he removed his left hand from his pocket to reveal the tools of a lockpick. That was because it was indeed a lockpick as he knelt down to work silently with the door handle. Practice, technique, and finesse controlled the pick and pin that danced in the mechanism of the lock. One after another, the locked pins were set into place. With a faint click, the door was unlocked. After putting away his tools back into his pocket, he grabbed the handle and twisted. His expectations were met when the doorknob opened without resistance and the door unlatched from its frame. And just like that, the abode before him was presented. He closed the door behind himself with silence that came with his experience. Unlike before, where he did not fear for anyone to notice his presence out in the world, he completely hid away his existence. His breaths was a series of shallow, controlled intakes of air. His steps were nothing more than of a mouse's. The slow heartbeat in his chest was in a state of ultimate calm. With just a thought, his quirk brought the dark apartment to life. Numbers appeared above every item that lay out in the open, all of which had dollar signs in front of them. The numbers all varied. Some were closer to others while some had much higher numbers. Those items were usually the larger, more expensive equipment like the refrigerator or washing machine and such. The things with single-digit numbers were usually the food items such as the little basket of apples on the kitchen counter. The objects that he couldn't see directly were summed up to gathered numbers. The cabinets showed him that collective total of what was behind but not what was there. The TV in the living room was tempting, but he would rather go for smaller things as he didn't want any attention, and since he didn't have any way to carry it other than to risk being seen running down the street with a fucking TV in his hands. The yellow backpack that sat innocently by the door of which he came also caught his eye. But seeing as the number was rather low, he moved on. All throughout his inspection, he held tightly onto the object in his right pocket. The tighter he squeezed it, the wider his grin became. He moved on from the main service rooms and found himself at the start of a hallway. Just like the rest of the house, it was pitch black. Thankfully, his quirk allowed him much better vision than most as the doors that were placed in it was all given their labels. Again, the numbers in front of the doors varied. The one that he was closest to had the highest number, so it was pretty easy to decide which door to choose from. He came upon the normal frame of the woodwork that separated himself and the room on the other side. The handle came into his grasp and twisted without a sound. The door opened in a slow and anticipating fashion. Just as he did, the number on the door disappeared and the revealed room before him lit up with numbers and dollar signs. The grin on his face stretched to sadistic levels. He entered into the room but did not close the door behind him. If things went south, then he needed a clean escape route. Everything he saw indicated the space to be occupied by a singular person. The medium-sized bed up against the wall in the middle had only one figure laying beneath the covers. Seeing as they were asleep, they quickly checked the area around them. Normal items along with normal possessions. Things that indicated to that of an adult female. He stepped towards the dresser as that was where most of the higher digit numbers resided. He quickly looked over the objects that presented themselves out in the open. Although it was ridiculously low-priced, the first thing that caught his eye was a poorly made clay statue of what looked to be All Might. The dulled-out colors and cracks on it were a sign of age. The thing wasn't even worth a whole $1. Looking some more resulted in the finding of hard money and some cheap jewelry. He didn't take it quite yet and instead remembered their locations. He wanted only the most mobile and expensive of items. This was merely picking out the finest for later. Doing another quick scan of the room, he spotted something that he didn't realize before. The bed that the person was sleeping had way too high of a price. He's seen better quality beds with much lower values. That was when he realized another thing. There was something underneath. He mentally chuckled and got down on his knees on the left side. The small bed cover flap that hung over the edge of the bed was lifted to give away the hidden contents below. The male was disappointed to be met with objects of small value. Confusion crossed his mind for a short minute before his eyes widened at the find of a small box near the foot of the bed. Soundless shuffles came from his small movement to scoot down the frame and reach for the object that gained his hungry attention. The thick rubber tips on the ends of his glove held onto the top of the box as he pulled it towards him. With it now sitting in his lap, the man looked it over. It was maybe a bit bigger than his head and looked to be some sort of medical container. The thick layer of undisturbed dust atop of it indicated that it had not been touched in several years. He wasn't entirely sure about this one, but the multiple numbers that his quirk showed him make him not care. His anticipation grew as did his grin when the object came into sight. Confusion came back into his expression as he identified the very few items within. The first to catch his eyes was an unused needle. Next to it were a couple bottles that were full of liquid, none of which have even been punctured as the thin plastic lids were pristine. The needle itself wasn't so valuable but rather the small bottles. His curiosity getting the best of him, he picked one up gently and held it close. Even with his quirk, it was difficult for him to make out the tiny words that were on the side of it. Once he finally was able to figure it out. Quirk suppressants. The man furrowed his eyes at the small bottle in his hand. No wonder this apartment had an apparent larger price than the others. Quirk suppressants were not cheap by any means. It was also piquing his interest even further as to why this person would even need this. A thought popped into the back of his head that caused his to turn back to the dresser. Just like many other things that he skipped over, there were an assortment of photos. Among some were of two women, one with dark green hair and the other had sandy blonde. However, most of which consisted of a young boy with similar green hair. Taking a deep look at one of the more close-up pictures of the child showed his black eyes. The little specks that were in the center showed as his glowing green irises. He was smiling so innocently. His eyes were so full of excitement and joy as he looked to something off camera. The man shivered at the sight, and he thought that he was good at putting on masks. That bright smile may be genuine, but the darkness of his blackened eyes gave it away. The sound of a shuffle nearly caused the man to drop the box as he jerked back to the bed in front of him. The woman that he knew to be sound asleep was shifting around in place, eventually turning to where she was facing the man. After a satisfying deep breath and exhale through her nose, she resumed her motionless state. He could now see her face. It matched the lady with the green hair in the photo. The grin returned to his face. He wouldn't make the same mistake last time. He made the error of attempting to take the most valuable items before pacifying the person. That was what had caused him to be nearly caught when the person suddenly woke up and screams bloody murder, which alerted the neighbors. No. This time he was going to make sure that he got a good haul. The bottle in his hand was gently placed back in the box before it was closed and slid under the bed just out of sight. He was going to play this the safest way possible. He left no tracks, no clues, No signs to be traced back to him. That meant ridding of any possible way for the person to catch him off guard and fuck up his night. Standing back up, his hand once more reached into his right pocket. He felt the familiar feeling of smooth metal, and a defined drip matched the details of his hand. Pulling both back out revealed the small pocket knife. It wasn't much or anything fancy, but it sure did get the job done. He pressed his thumb onto the button that released the blade out into the open with a soft click. The man found it pleasuring to sneak into places where no one can see him coming. He felt joy to steal and take from others, as it was just too easy and simple. His quirk allowed him to see the value of anything inorganic in the form of prices. He knew where to look or go. He knew how to take it for himself. However, the feeling of plunging his seemingly pathetic little knife sapped the life straight out of someone made him feel ever more alive. Even as the weapon inched closer and closer to the woman's neck, his state did not change. He was still quiet, and his breaths were just as slow as his heartbeat. His lanky physique leaned over the bed. Pale brown eyes were even wider with excitement. His grin was on the verge of making him look insane if you ignored the knife in his hand and that he was peering down at the unsuspecting woman. The blade was only a foot away now. It was closing in on 10 inches. Only 7 inches. A mere 5 inches remained from the metal and soft skin. Only 2 inches from death. 1 inch before a single thrust was all it took for one life to vanish. 1 inch. 1 inch. 1 inch. 1 inch. The knife that needed so little effort to meet its target held tightly within his grasp. It began to shake. No. His hand began to shake. All of him began to shake. He level and controlled breaths transitioned into greedy gasps for air. The beat in his chest could be heard with his own ears as it began to thump faster and faster. The grin that he expressed flattened out into a grimace. Sweat had rushed out of nowhere from his pores and down his body. Any feelings of delight or exhilaration was crushed by an overwhelming sense of dread. He hadn't the faintest clue where this sudden terror came from, but it kept him from going any further. Because if he did, then he will die. The only thing that he felt he could try was flee. Whatever this was didn't want him here, and it wasn't shy to tell him that. If he didn't escape, his life could end right here. The base instincts of survival were kicking heavily into his mind. All of his willpower was out into just turning around and running far, far away. Even his greatest attempts to do just that was met with actually painful resistance. It felt as if his body had been still for years and was just now moving for the first time. All his joints were stiff yet weak. After much effort being put into a single action, he was rewarded with finally being able to face the door. His escape. An escape that was blocked. The man very well wanted to scream. To beg for forgiveness and a second chance. Pray to God and rid of his sins. Wish to see another day where he can be better. The green eyes that pierced his soul promised none of that. The eyes that looked so dead but gave an aura of beastly vigor gazed lifelessly at the man. The young male that looked to be a fresh teen looked void of any emotions, as did the blackness around his glowing green irises. The small amount of light they casted painted the face of the boy in a radioactive hue. It perfectly defined the long cracks that leaked from around his eyes and over his face. For as long as they stared at one another, the boy did not move. He didn't even blink. The man felt his attention being drawn towards the misshapen hands that hung at his sides. His level of fear jumped even higher at what was definitely not normal, even in this quirk-filled society. It was only his shoulders that were visible from the plain blue tank top. After then on, skin, muscle, and flesh were non-existent to show the spotless bones. They were much too deformed to be that of a human. The bones were thicker and even longer. His hands reached just past his knees. The tips of said skeletal hands were pointed. Each finger was elongated and morphed to take the shape of vertical blades. None looked any less lethal than the other. While the man shivered like a leaf in the wind, the boy stood like a statue. The statue took a step. The man felt actual tears break the surface of his horrified eyes. His vision was beginning to blur from his rapid breaths, causing him to hyperventilate. It was a mystery how he was still standing on his weak knees as they shook without stop. The thing that disguised itself as a human took another step. The room was small enough that it would only require a few more steps before they would be within arm's reach. The distance shortened with another step. No matter how much he tried to regain a part of himself to hold any kind of control over his paralyzed body, nothing worked in the slightest for the man to try and escape. If only he could move just enough to point the knife in his hand back towards the woman. Maybe then he could try a hostage situation. From the pictures on the dresser, this should be the woman's son. He could get the boy to back up if his mother was in danger. If only he could fucking move. Move. Another step. Move, damn it. Another step. Here they were. They stood directly in each other's presence. The man had no time to think of anything else in his racing mind that was having a breakdown. His eyes were trained on the boy's left hand that began to rise, came painfully slow, as if the boy knew that he had all the time in the world while the man suffered throughout the process. Kept coming closer. Just like how he did with his knife, the boy's clawed hand approached inch by inch. Where they first seemed to be coming for his face, the man now saw their true destination as they neared his throat. The same throat that was straining to release any kind of noise of scream to alert someone. He couldn't give a shit anymore about being caught. It was better than what was going to happen if this hellspawn had the night all to himself. A first tear rolled down his cheek just as he felt the first sensation of cold bone on his neck. He doubled his efforts to do possibly anything to help himself. His attempts were wasted. A full skeletal hand could be felt wrapped entirely around his fragile neck. The pointed ends rested every so gently on his skin that broken upon contact of the sharp claws. It was almost too subtle to notice at first, but now he was certain. The hand was tightening. It continued to grow tighter with pressure until his Adam's apple was restricted from the grip. Shallow chokes came with the desperate gasps for air. His sounds were too muffled and weak to even be heard by the woman who slept peacefully next to him. Stinging pain came from the 5 points that penetrated into his flesh. He could feel blood drip down his neck and into his clothes. It was unexpected when the grip took a new route. Suddenly, the man is no longer touching the ground as his feet hovered above the carpet. His chokes became harsher and more consistent. Oxygen was starting to get scarce in his brain. In the last great urge of the fight for life or death, the man regained his senses and shot his right hand forward. The pocket knife he held sank straight into the boy's gut. A quick sound of tearing cloth and tearing flesh registered in his ears before it was gone. However, the boy's stare and his grip were still there. He looked down to the knife that had certainly just been stabbed 4 inches into his abdomen. Yet, there was no change. The boy's hold was still strong and suffocating. So, he stabbed again. Another sound of the blade sinking into his stomach, but there was no reaction. He stabbed again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Again. 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 Several times, the metal blade impaled into the boy effortlessly. His knife was just as soaked with blood as was the greenette's blur shirt that was turning purple from that added crimson. The man could feel himself on the brink of losing conscious from the lack of oxygen. His legs were beginning to flail wildly, and his other arm beat at the hand that held him. But for the life of him, he still could not scream. As a final attempt to survive, he took one last shot. He switched his knife to his left and arched his arm back far. With all the strength he could muster, he swung his arm as if his life depended on it. Well, except that it really did depend on it. The man's aim was true and landed square in the side of the boy's head. The tip of his blade brushed through his green hair and straight for his temple. He felt it jab inside effortlessly, almost like a hot knife through butter. Actually, it was more like air. There was no sound of the blade sinking inside the boy's skull, only the barely audible thud of a rather blunt connection. It didn't feel right. It didn't look right. Nothing had changed. He was sure that his strike would have been an instant death for the black-eyed monster. Yet here he stood, unaffected, unfazed, untouched. Even with his mind racing a mile a minute, he was able to learn of something. His hands still shook freely. If the knife was 4 inches deep into bone, flesh, and even brain matter, then his hold should be solid with the support of the handle he held. So, why was it that his hand still shook? The man slowly took away his weapon. The majority of it was blocked by the messy green hair but soon came into view. Just as it went in, there was nothing holding it back or keeping it in place. That was because there was no blade. All the man had in his hand was a handle with no metal point to label it as a weapon. There was the very edge of metal peeking out from the grip that showed just exactly where the knife had broken. His only means of survival had not been able to kill his target. With his only response to look down, he saw the small object placed at the boy's feet that was all a blur. The blade of his knife had fallen silently onto the soft carpet. Black spots in the corner of his vision were beginning to obscure the already dark room. The only thing that stood out from all of it were the 2 green eyes that never left his gaze. It was the last thing he saw before the world went sideways. The hastened crunches that resonated from within his own body that originated from his neck. And his body succumbed under a wave of cold before going numb. The arm that hovered near the greenette's head went limp and fell to the man's side, the handle of the knife barely being held by the grip that loosened. His squirming legs halted all attempts to free himself as they lightly swung back and forth. The right side of his head nearly rested on his shoulder. It most likely would have rolled backwards and hung like a sack if it weren't for the crushing grip that acted as a brace for his neck since his spinal cord was no longer useful. Now, just like the green-eyed boy, the man's eyes stared lifelessly into nothing. His struggled chokes were no more and ceased along with his heartbeat all at once. Back to as it was previously, there were only 2 living people in the apartment. And both were sound asleep. Inko woke as she usually did when her alarm went off. Fluttering her eyes open, she reached over to press the button on the clock that brought silence to her room. Slowly but surely, she pulled herself out of bed and did a few easy stretches. Feeling satisfied, she got to her dresser where she changed into her work clothes and headed out into the hallway. Her customary routine of preparing breakfast started as the kitchen slowly filled with the smell of food. She could tell from the time on the clock that Izuku should be arriving out of his room in the next minute. Inko just finished the 2 morning meals and set them down on the table. The mother took a single bite out of her own dish before checking the time again. It read 2 minutes past what Izuku usually came out of his room. Strange. Inko didn't pay it too much attention as she took a few more bites. She paid herself her own mind and got lost in thought in her morning haze. It had gotten to the point where she ran on autopilot for an unknown amount of time. Just as easily as she did, Inko was back and fully aware that the clock read almost 5 minutes have passed. The plate of food opposite of the table in front of her was untouched and has lost its steam trails, indicating that it had also lost most of its warmth. This was definitely out of the ordinary. Inko stood from her seat and back to the hallway of the apartment. She passed her own door and to her son's, which was just a little further down the hall. Izuku's room was still closed. Pressing the side of her gently against it, she could hear movement from inside. That meant he was awake, right? She leaned back from the door and raised a hand to knock on it. The knuckle of her pointer finger headed for its surface but never met. The door swung open to show that Izuku was just on the other side and fully dressed. Both jumped slightly the moment they met each other's eyes, meaning that they had accidentally spooked one another with their sudden appearance. "Oh, Izuku, you startled me." She finished her explanation with some laughs from the encounter. "Haha, sorry. Then again, you did the same for me. I had no idea you were there. Did you need something?" He displayed a similar reaction before asking his mother. "Well, I just saw that you were rather late getting up this morning, and I thought that maybe you had forgotten to set your alarm," the woman replied while backing up so that Izuku could exit the room. "No, my alarm was set. It's just that I was looking for something." As they walked down the hall and towards the diner table, both adopted looked of confusion. "I can't seem to find my night shirt." Inko blinked as the sentence didn't make too much sense in her head. "The blue tank top that you wore to bed last night?" she said questionably. "How you do lose something that you were wearing?" Izuku simply shrugged while looking defeated as he sat in his seat and took his first bite of food. "I really couldn't tell ya. I wouldn't be surprised at this point if my quirk ate at something. While it was joke, Izuku said in an annoyed manner. Inko smiled with amusement but couldn't keep the small pang of concern fill her. Other than the strange disappearance of a shirt, the morning went on like any other one. Both ate their food and further prepared for the oncoming day that required their attention and energy. Inko drove herself to work while Izuku took his calming stroll to school. The younger Greenette walked along the same sidewalks and over the same crosswalks to pass the streets. The same stores and buildings came and went. Even the same dumb crowd of people that blocked one particular spot on the sidewalk. They were always gathered and watching the news TV positioned behind the glass wall. Izuku never really bothered more than a glance as he passed through the crowd. Looked to be just the normal everyday stuff. Heroes and villains fought one another, a general update on society and politics, all that stuff. The only things that actually seemed interesting was a murder victim that was brutally shredded and torn apart in some alley. Just some guy with pale brown eyes. Izuku didn't give it a second glance before moving on. Chapter 4. A series of events. Izuku, age 6. Alrighty kids, gather around. Doing as the instructor said, the class of 6-year-olds hopped out of their seats and to the open area in the corner. They formed the shape of a large crescent around the well-dressed man. Their teacher had told them that this person was a guest in today's special activity. He had addressed himself as Liamo and was a sort of psychologist. Apparently, he was here because it has been a newly declared project for kids with newly developed quirks to be taught about self-control and a clear mental state. Most likely due to the fact that so many villains have been arising and will only continue to grow unless kids with powerful quirks aren't tempted by the path of villainy. Young Izuku Midoriya sat within this group of children as they listened to the man tell them of the basics of his profession and what they would be doing. Although, Izuku had his attention divided between the man's teaching and the blonde beside the Greenette. They weren't nearly as close to one another as to when Izuku had sat down next to Kaken as he scooted farther away just a moment later. Izuku didn't like that his friend has been ignoring him recently. Well, recently is a very loose term in this situation as it had actually been for the past 2 years. It was greatly troubling to the boy as he just wanted to hang out with Kaken again without the blonde and some of the other kids calling him names. His attempts at repairing their fragile friendship has proved fruitless results and even seemed to make it worse. Rather than trying anything today, Izuku just wanted something to distract himself. With meditation, you can clear your mind and achieve a state of inner peace. People all around the world use this technique to relieve stress, calm yourself in situations that would usually have the opposite effect, and even find answers that wouldn't normally present themselves in any other case. That sounded interesting. Izuku was now listening intently at the words that the man spoke. The explanation he gave intrigued the black-eyed child that filled him with excitement. He always loved trying new things and this meditation sounded fun. If it really did what Liamo said it would, then it could possibly help him out with his current problem. All right now, are we all ready to try it out? His question was answered with nods and a few replies, all of which meaning that they prepared to try this new experience. Okay, first things first, get real comfy. Relaxing your mental state requires a comfortable physical state. Izuku shifted lightly in his crisscross position and laid his hands nicely in his lap. He felt hurt to see Kaken scoot farther away in the corner of his vision but kept his eyes on the instructor. Good, good. Close your eyes and try to think of either nothing or something that makes you calm and relaxed. Doing as the man said, Izuku dropped his eyelids over his void-like eyes, cutting off the world around him from sight and extinguishing the glow of his pupils. When he closed his eyes, his vision didn't turn black like everyone else's. Not quite anyway. Instead, it was more green due to the trapped illumination that his irises provided. Next, he tried to think of things that suited Liamo's request. Izuku wasn't sure what he meant by clearing his mind, so maybe he'll try thinking of something nice. Thinking of his mom wouldn't work since that made him happy. The image of All Might in his head couldn't do either. The boy searched his mind for anything that fit that description. Something that made him calm. There were a few things, but most of which sounded silly or were normal. It had to be meaningful in some way. The waves of his memories flowed by as he surfed along his life experiences. The entire contents of his mind flashed with one idea after another. Izuku was so in depth with his own thoughts that he hadn't realized the instructor had spoken again. He didn't even hear Kakin next to him growl with frustration that this was stupid, and it didn't work. The greenette took no notice how his heartbeat slowed to a melodic rhythm that fell in place with his automatic breaths. He especially didn't realize that his body was no longer twitching from his quirk. Being a hero? The singular idea popped into his head. It was the greatest goal that he thought life had to offer. It was something he lived every day in the hopes that it would bring him one step closer to accomplishing his dreams. Just saying the words fills him with excitement and joy. But in this moment, it brought him peace of mind, reassurance, clarity. The world around him faded to nothing. There was no sound to combat against the dead silence. The pressure from the air around him that Izuku never knew was there lightened. And for some reason, the rug he sat on felt weird. It was prickly. Izuku graced himself with sight once more by opening his eyes to try and readjust his position as the rug beneath him became uncomfortable. Only he was no longer sitting on a rug, but rather on grass. The patch of grass he sat on was the target of his shocked expression. His wide eyes matched with his agape mouth and just stared at the ground beneath him. He slowly leaned over and extended a hand. Grabbing hold of a singular blade, he plucked it straight from the dark dirt. It was in fact real. Wasn't it? He felt the texture, so it had to be. But it just didn't make sense. Green pupils slowly trailed from the piece of grass in his hand to the ground. Then he searched upwards. A forest. A dark forest. It was hard for Izuku to make everything out that was displayed before him. He knew that he saw trees, bushes, and some other plants of variety. The dark atmosphere mixed them all together into a messy silhouette that felt drained of any color. The only light he saw came from above. Izuku was surrounded by a pale light in the small clearing he found himself in. Looking up, he found the moon hovering high. It was completely full, yet it seemed so dull of its usual shine. Overhaul, this strange and unfamiliar place was dead silent, dead of color, dead of movement, and dead of anything alive other than himself. Hello! The boy's call was much quieter than the amount of effort he put into it. His low shout was nothing more than of regular speaking volume. Hello? Despite the greater attempt, the mere yell didn't even arouse an echo. So it was official. He was alone. This place of his imagination was his to explore be himself. Well, might as well make the most of it. Izuku stood as he remembered the itchy sensation that the spiky grass brought. He quickly brushed off his legs before taking another look around. Was there some sort of purpose to this place? Was this the relaxed mental state that Liamo spoke about? And if so, how was it supposed to help him? Maybe he needed to work for it? Answered just don't present themselves, they're found. After coming to that conclusion, Izuku picked a random direction and headed that way. A noise that didn't come from his soundless footsteps stopped him. Was it from one of his classmates? Did they somehow come here too? Why didn't they answer him? Was it even a classmate? Izuku spun in an instant towards the sound that was strangely clear. It was impossible not to spot it the moment he did. The radioactive green stood out too visibly in the dark flora surrounding it. The glow of its eyes was the only light to kill the dull moonlight. The eyes that peered from a dark spot in the tree line were Izuku's own. Multiple questions arose within his mind. Each were born from overwhelming curiosity and wonder. The instructor said something about inner peace. Does that also mean finding your inner self? Was this second pair of eyes that matched the greenette's a duplicate of himself that resided in his figment of imagination? Yuyum. Hi. His greeting was at a volume that Izuku made sure could reach the ears of the second presence. However, there was no response. Not even a reaction. The boy tilted his head in confusion. Surely they must have heard him. Maybe he needs to get closer. Izuku altered his path towards the green eyes. They were locked deeply into his own and hadn't moved a ver since their gazes met. With each step, the distance between them shortened, Izuku showing a friendly smile all along the way. It finally got to the point where only 10 feet separated them. Izuku still could not see that figure of the second pair of green eyes. The deep pit of shadow they stayed put at was too dark to make anything out. Not even the glow of the eyes gave anything away. They were now only a few feet away. Izuku slowed his pace as to not make himself seem dangerous. He didn't want to scare his self-conscious. Or would that be scaring himself? Questions for later. Hey, you don't have to hide. I'm Izuku. Although, I'm pretty sure you already knew that. His sentence ended with a light giggle. Do you have a name? Or do you want to be called Izuku too? There were still no replies to anything that he has said. The eyes continued to stare. Am I really that shy? He punctuated with another giggle as he rubbed the back of his head with a hand. Still no reaction. Wait. There was a reaction. Izuku felt excitement pool into him as he saw the eyes lower themselves just slightly. This was it. Izuku was finally getting an answer. The answer was a strange one, as the boy thought he heard what could only be best described as a demented growl that barely reached his ears. Then the eyes went up. In a smooth motion, they rose higher into the air to the point that Izuku had to crane his neck all the way back to hold the gaze. It was until now that Izuku realized one detail he shouldn't have missed. The eyes were identical to his. A perfect match, actually. Except for one thing. They were much more spread apart to fit onto a normal kid's head. If this was supposed to be Izuku's inner self, then why did it have a greater eye span, and why did it now tower over him? An unexplainable feeling of fear washed over him in that moment. Everything in his body quickened significantly. His breathing, heart rate, the newly found adrenaline that rushed through every vein in his system. All of it. The eyes that stared down at him were no longer enchanting. They were horrifying. Nothing in front of him could be explained within his young mind. All he knew that he was scared and that he wanted to leave. The only problem was that he could not move. Besides the dread that shook his body like a leaf in a hurricane, he was frozen still. The last thing he heard was a second haunting growl. The last thing he saw was the moon glistening off several massive fangs. The last thing he felt was death. Aya! Izuku's nightmare was replaced by colorful shapes around him, yet he continued to scream. His blood-curdling yells echoed through the halls of school and turned several heads. His classmates all jerked from surprise and saw Izuku laying on his side while holding himself tightly. The instructor and the class teacher both stopped what they were doing and hopped into action. Both kneeling beside the bawling brunette who started to freak out for no apparent reason. Just like the rest, Katsuki Bakugo watched with stunned expression as they witnessed the class weirdo go into a full panic. Tears flowed relentlessly down his face past his tightly shut eyes. Izuku didn't go back to the woods for the next 3 years. 1 week. 1 week until the entrance exam at UA. Was Izuku nervous? Not quite yet, but he could feel the anticipation slowly building. All he had was one shot to prove that he wasn't weak or useless. There was no room for mistakes or flaws. Just one could result in total failure. Was he confident? The old rusted car that was torn and smashed to pieces beyond recognition in front of the boy filled him with it. Despite the major drawbacks it brought, his quirk gave him power. The number of broken objects and dumped items around him was the result of that. Izuku diverted his attention from the car to the large structure behind him. Using his quirk on his right foot, he lost the feeling of the warm sand and instead with an invisible strength. The blur of his straight back kick was followed by a loud shriek of shredding metal. Peering over his shoulder, Izuku saw the busted refrigerator with his skeletal foot embedded directly in the middle of the top door. The activation of his quirk in his other foot took no longer than a second before leaping off the ground while using the leverage of the stuck limb to twist himself midair. The momentum of the action and the swing of his wide kick summoned an even louder crash than before from solid bone against metal as the kitchen appliance was knocked away with the force and fell to the ground with a booming thud. Its impact with the sand stirred a miniature explosion of light brown that slowly dissipated into a cloud of falling particles. Izuku stood from his landing position to watch the process. Once the sand subsided enough, the boy reapproached the refrigerator. His feet sinking deeper into the sand with not as much area to hold him up. When he got close enough, He flung up his right leg with surprising flexibility to execute a devastating axe kick down onto the bottom door. The bare bone of his heel busted right through the thin cover as it gave way to the stronger force. With one foot nearly buried in the sand and the other standing on a shattered fridge door, Izuku thought to himself. He took one last deep breath before coming to the decision of taking a short break. Izuku hopped up on the other side of the fridge that wasn't damaged and pulled up his legs that were now normal with him into a lazy crisscross. His arms were pulled back as they held him up in the backwards leaning position. The view of the newly setting sun met his figure. The warm orange rays were able to overpower the glow of his eyes but held no power in lighting the voids in his sockets. Based on the angle of the burning star, it was nearing the final hour of which Izuku had before going home. The very same cycle that has been going on for the last 3 months after the Greenette found this place. Dagoba Beach. Regardless of the literal trash dump condition it was in, it had proved to be a perfect place for his next level of training. For a good portion of his life, Izuku had worked on improving the control of his quirk as well as the strength of his body. The results of those years could be seen in his well-built frame that had a small shine from the sweat. Only a light set of personal gym clothes hid most of his chiseled body. However, actually utilizing his quirk was something he couldn't do very often during that time. Doing it at home wasn't the best as Izuku knew his mother wasn't exactly on good terms with his strange power. Going to any gym that allowed quirk use was too expensive and gave similar reactions. That was why he was thrilled to finally find a place that he could go all out and put his training to the test. It was almost too easy to find free tutorial videos of martial arts and combat techniques on the internet. The one that Izuku specializes in becomes a brutal dance of harsh strikes when paired with his quirk. The best way to describe it is to hit first and hit hard. The beach has been his personal punching bag for the last few months and it has given promising results. Objects that ranged from soft cloths to massive hulks of thick materials have been at the receiving end of abilities to perfection. Yeah, 3 months isn't much to actually test these moves, but it fared to be rather easy as he's been closely analyzing these sorts of things for nearly a decade. The continuous hold to control his quirk, the years of tough bodybuilding and training, a short stack of books of picking apart his strange abilities as well as others, it's all coming together. Izuku closed his eyes and took a satisfying breath through his nose. After letting it back out, he uncrossed his legs and used his arms to push him forwards just a nudge before tucking them to his chest. In the moment that he was rocked forward onto his feet, he kicked off and arched his back to fall into a fluid backflip. His figure was airborne for only a moment before he landed perfectly on the other side of the refrigerator with his feet bracing the sand gently. He didn't take any time to enjoy the expertly executed stunt as he instead raised his left hand. The very tips of his fingers withered away for his bones to be kissed by the orange light of the sun. This part of his quirk was easy enough, but the next part needed some extra effort. A second of concentration brought forth the ends of his bones to elongate and become pointed into vertically cut blades. Along with the change came the usual feeling of resistance of his quirk squirming before subsiding under the harsh leash of Izuku's control. A few wiggles of his fingers before the teen reached over to the other side of the fridge and dug in his bones into the metal for grip. When his other hand braced against the edge of the side he was on, Izuku gave one large tug that overpowered the weight of the fridge as it now rested on his right shoulder. Both his legs shook every so slightly from the massive increase of weight but were far from giving way. His steps were solid as he walked over to the slowly growing pile of trash he had accumulated along with the many others. "I sure hope you aren't using your quirk to do that." Izuku both tensed and jumped at the voice that emitted from his right. The fridge he was holding was directly between them, so Izuku could not have seen whoever it was that has discovered his secret spot. Turning himself with the large appliance still on his shoulder, he spotted the source of voice. Leaning up against a stack of tires with his arms crossed was a man. "Because that would be illegal. Sheesh. He looks like he doesn't even need a quirk like mine to show his skeleton." Izuku thought to himself as he inspected the sickly thin man with semi-long blonde hair that had 2 long bangs hanging past his shoulders in funny angles. His smirk really wasn't one that of someone who just caught someone with their hand in a cookie jar, but rather a hint of impressiveness and even excitement if you looked close enough. Izuku was honestly too busy studying the popping details of the man that he hadn't heard his last statement. Instead, He was somewhat fixated on the blonde's eyes, not quite like his own in regards of the deep voids that rejected any form of light, but still deep enough to create an overlapping shadow that made his bright blue eyes more vibrant. Hello! The man must have realized that Izuku was too caught up in his own thoughts to respond and opted to snap him out of it. It worked as Izuku blinked away, the thoughts refocused on the second occupant of the beach. The greenette gave a brief glance to his left hand that still had his bone claws and back to the man. No. It was for some reason at that moment, the door that Izuku had kicked decided to fall out of the fridge and onto the sand with a thump. Izuku spared another glance to his metal betrayer. The blonde man raised an eyebrow at the not very believable answer, as he could also see Izuku's morphed fingertips. The boy didn't know what he was expecting, but it sure wasn't to hear a laugh from the man. As he seemed to find the encounter humorous, Izuku just stood there awkwardly to himself, still holding the big-ass fridge that was starting to make his legs burn. Ha ha ha. What are you doing here, kid? After the short period of laughter, the man questioned Izuku while uncurling a hand to gesture to the beach around them. The boy in question took that as his cue to turn and continue walking back towards the pile he was originally going to before answering. Well, you see. His sentence was cut short when he let out a grunt from setting down his hull on the mound of trash's edge. A quick side clap of his hands to brush off any sand and setting them on his hips before he turned back to the man. I'm working. His final answer sounded questionable before ending with confidence. The man's raised eyebrow was accompanied by his other, as he didn't seem to be too convinced. You're working. The blonde made sure to display his suspicions as he repeated the word. Yep. The P in his second answer was popped with the same amount of confidence as before. With whom? A smug smile lightly graced the man's lips as he saw Izuku lost a small amount of his own. What? There was noticeable nervousness in the boy's reply. Who are you working for? Employees of a company aren't allowed to use their quirks unless they are given a business license that has been approved by both the company they are working for and the Quirk Control Committee, as long as it's used for their job only. The man could see Izuku grow more and more nervous the further he explained. It was actually quite comical on his end. I'm working for... Izuku gave one last attempt to pull of a good enough lie by shrugging his shoulders and giving a weak smile once more. Myself. Whether it was the right answer or not, it was met with laughter from the man once more. Izuku knew at this point he was basically caught and opted to just stuffing his hands in his pockets. When the man's amused state ended, he brought up both arms in a dismissive gesture along with his head. No need to try that hard for a lie, young man. You're not in trouble. At least not with me anyway. Just tell me what you're really doing out here. The posture of the man became more friendly and relaxed as he was done teasing the boy. Said boy also looked to relax as he even seemed to reciprocate some of the humor from before. Well, I guess I'm doing two things at once. I'm mainly using this isolated beach to train myself. At the same time, I'm trying to get this place a little cleaned up. The man nodded at his first answer and looked around when he gave his second. He looked over the compacted piles of trash that he could tell were made up of a lot of broken parts along with some gouge marks that resembled the boy's claws. So, you are the one who's been tidying Dagobah up. I've realized about over a month ago that trash has been moved around, but haven't been able to find who's been doing it. The man said with obvious satisfaction of finally finding the mystery person behind the cleaning. Sort of. I've managed to gather it all together into piles, but haven't actually cleaned anything. All the trash is still here, but without any way to get it out of here, it's gonna stay. Izuku has tried to find ways to get rid of the trash in the meantime of training. Most of those ideas weren't plausible as he had no way to haul these ridiculously large piles of garbage to the nearest legal dump. For now, all he could do was continue to make these piles until someone decides to take them away. Wait, you come here that often? Why? Izuku couldn't understand why anyone would want to come here other than to add to the piles. Well, same reason as you. Not to train my quirk, but to do something about this trash. I remember this place when it used to be spotless and could see the sunset while laying in the soft sand. I've been wanting to do something about it for a while now, but haven't exactly found the time to do it. Even though his blue eyes looked into Izuku's green, they were seeing the nostalgic memories that the beach brought. The boy could almost feel the emotion in the man's words. After all, he knew what he meant. Izuku turned to look back over the ocean. In his entire field of vision, the sand past the walls of garbage was mainly clear that met the water's tide. Above the rippling water of the vast sea, its surface reflected the sun's gentle light. The greenette has seen the sunset many times for himself. If it weren't for the littered pieces of trash and the wrinkling smell of it all, Izuku would have been able to easily agree with the blonde's words. His green eyes turned back to the adult that had also set his sight on the view. Then, they trailed over the man's frame, thin and frail. It was hard to believe that he said he was going to try and clean the place up with that body. Oh, what the hell? Hey! Their colorful eyes met once more as the man adopted an expression of curiosity as to what Izuku had to say. If you're going to try to clean this dump, then you're definitely going to need help. I already have this place arranged for transfer. If you can get me something to ship all this crap out of here, then I'll gladly lend you a hand. Izuku found himself giving a smile to the man. It was kinda hard not to when the man's eyes shone with great gratitude. There was also something else that Izuku couldn't quite place but ignored it. You're serious? You'll actually do that? Izuku was a little off taken by the blonde's burst of excitement. It was as if he was hoping he would offer but wasn't expecting him to actually do it. Yeah, sure. I'm busy most of the week because of oncoming finals. I also can't do it this weekend since UA's entrance exam is happening. But after that, I'm free whenever. The greenette explained with a hand on the back of his neck and his eyes averted for no particular reason. When he looked back, he saw that it seemed everything he said made the man more in awe. I guess I should have known you were aiming to be a hero with your training. And UA, nevertheless, you have very admirable goals, young man. If that's the case, then how about the weekend after this? Saturday evening after 1 o'clock? I have a pretty heavy-duty truck that we can use to transport all this to the dump. At the man's proposal and set time, it was the boy's turn to look astonished. Wow, really? That's actually perfect. And yeah, I'm free next Saturday. The relief could be heard in the boy's voice as he was excited to finally rid the beach of the unwelcome filth. It was mixed with curiosity when the man walked up to him. Before he could ask, a hand was extended towards him in a friendly gesture. That was when Izuku realized he was asking for a handshake. The boy took it with a firm grasp that caused the blonde to smile wider. It must have been infectious because Izuku felt a smile slipping onto his own face. I am grateful that you are willing to put time and effort into this. It is a good trait that all heroes should have. The words of the adult grew Izuku's smile even more, before it quickly dropped. Oh wait, what time is it? Izuku went into a sudden panic as his arms went into a frenzy searching over his body. The blonde was taken aback by this startled action as he watched for a moment being the greenette pulled out a phone from one of his few pockets. There was a brief moment where he looked at it before his green eyes get wider. I'm so sorry for cutting this short like this, but I really need to get home. Thank you and I'll see you that time. Izuku shouted the end of his statement as he gathered his things and sprinted off with surprising speed. All of this was witnessed by the amused eyes of the blonde as he watched him go. That boy really is something. His low voice was filled with curiosity and a bit of amazement. After all, that was the second time that he's met this black-eyed child, and each time, he's offered his assistance with no reward that was also unnecessary. If that wasn't a sign of selflessness, then he didn't know what was. Years that he's been searching for someone, and this kid with every quality so far that he approved of just fell into his lap. Not to mention that the boy's quirk was much more powerful than he initially thought. It was far too early to decide, but he couldn't help that his hopes were high. He looked out to the ocean one last time. If this worked out, then he would get the chance to relish the sight once more. A bright reflection brings his attention to the ground below him. The fridge door that dropped when the greenette was carrying it. The blonde chuckled to himself before leaning over to pick it up. It was heavily disfigured and beyond repair. The large indent in the middle made sure of that. He walked over to the broken refrigerator of which it originally came and set it gently on top. A nod of satisfaction signaled that he was ready to leave the beach himself. Something caught his eye for the second time. The man stopped mid-step and jerked back to what had signaled his mind. Just around the corner of this specific mound of trash, there was a large object. Walking around to get a better look, he saw that it was a large metal sheet of some sort. It seemed like it used to be part of a billboard sign or something. For that past month that he's realized that someone has been moving the trash on the beach, the man has also found the markings they've left behind. Broken parts, dents, indentions, bent scraps, and the strange claw marks that he's been able to identify to the bone claws of the boy. A lot of these marks could be found on this singular sheet of metal. But there was one in particular that stood out. The set of 5 claw marks were over 5 feet long and wide enough to clear the man's whole body. Friday. The very last Friday before the singular event that could completely alter the fate of Izuku Midoriya. Tomorrow is UA's entrance exam. So Izuku was really starting to feel a bit anxious. Not that he showed it though. No, in front of the judging looks of his classmates, he shows his very real conviction. He has full intent to prove them all wrong in just one day. He'll crush the exam unlike how they've tried to crush his spirit all those years. His lifelong dream of being a hero is brighter than ever and no one can snuff it out. Not even the blonde that's currently following him home. Oi! Izuku was just nearing his home when Bakugo finally called out from behind him. The former let out a groan as he debated stopping or to just keep walking. Don't go to UA. That got Izuku to stop real fast as he whipped around to glare at the blonde. His red eyes weren't as hateful as they usually were but rather more instructive. The scowl that Izuku thought to be permanent on the explosive teen's face was more neutral. Not even his normal slouched-over posture was present. It wasn't threatening, just strong. Besides that, Izuku was still pissed that Bakugo is still trying to talk him down from this. Why the hell are you so dead set on making me not go? You get to waltz up there and show off your power, so why can't I? Izuku kept his anger inside but his voice gave it away. Bakugo was visibly surprised by Izuku's unusual hostility. Both teens took steps towards each other until only barely 5 feet stood between them. Deku, I don't know what the fuck you're thinking that going to a hero school is a good idea with that quirk of yours. The fact that the blonde's statement was genuine just kept rubbing Izuku the wrong way. And I don't know why you still think that I'm weak or useless. You have no idea of the struggles I had to push through to get to this point and you have even less knowledge on what I can do. His words were sturdy that made it sound impossible to argue with. I'm not talking about you being weak anymore. A little bit of Bakugo's scowl returned, as if saying the sentence was hard for him to admit. Izuku's reaction to the statement was what one would expect. Stunned. You made that pretty fucking obvious back behind the school. But that's not all, is there? What the? You can't control your quirk, can you? Once again, Bakugo raised his voice as his red eyes narrowed into the bright emeralds of Izuku's voids. That shit wasn't you. I could tell. I figured it out. Why you never used or showed your true quirk to anyone. It turns you into a goddamn monster. Doesn't it? That's why you're twitching all the damn time. The blonde was full on shouting now. He did little to hide the accusing tone in his questions. Yeah, all right. Just completely ignore everything that happened before that. When you ran around like a lunatic using your quirk to harm a classmate simply because your ego is bigger than any explosion you could ever make. You say I can't control myself? You wouldn't know what control is if it slapped you around like a ragdoll. Izuku spat venom for the teen that actually had the gall to try and fault him for what happened those many months ago. Besides that, the comeback came through clenched teeth. If you went fucking crazy because of me, then what'll happen if you go up against villains? Deku? You're a danger to yourself and everyone around you. Quit trying to play the hero like you were born for it. You were born a fucking freak, and that's all you ever will be. You hear me? Damn it? When Bakugo was finally done, Izuku was looking at the same old bastard that has been terrorizing him for years. His demeaning scowl has made its appearance to be the cherry on top of his intimidating form. Arms were raised of their pockets and fingers curled as they usually did when the blonde wanted to use his explosions on his target. All it did was piss Izuku off even more. The brunette's only answer was to lower his head to where his hair shielded the upper half of his face. His lips were pulled into an evident scowl that was beginning to match Bakugo's. Both his hands were balled into fists that squeezed uncomfortably tight. Well? You gonna answer? Bakugo shouted one last time to the black-eyed teen. The blonde's attitude halted when a sense of fear invaded his mind. His widened red eyes saw Izuku's tense state drop all at once. The shorter teen suddenly looked relaxed. Bakugo had no time to question it before Izuku raised his head once more to become trapped in the greenette's intense eye contact. For the third time, Bakugo witnessed black trails claw their way out of Izuku's eyes. You know, I think I finally get it. There was no longer any anger in his voice but rather an eerie calm. After all, since when the hell do you care for or about others? The only person you give a damn about is still yourself. Bakugo couldn't help that he felt stuck in place as he was forced to hear the greenette's words. And you especially don't care what happens to me unless it has anything to do with UA and heroes. Which means, the blonde felt his heart skip a beat when the creepiest smile laid upon his freckled face. It was nothing more than small tugs on the edges of his lips, but it felt like so much more. You're afraid. You know that I can get into UA, but you're too prideful to admit it. You would rather try to bully me into submission. That's all you ever do. Use your quirk to satisfy your needs and get your way. For the past 10 years, you tried the same thing. Well, guess what? Izuku closed the short distance between them and gripped onto Bakugo's collar as he wasn't wearing a tie and pulled him close before he could react. With the small amount of space between their faces, a shadow developed over the both of them, causing Izuku's glowing irises to shine brighter. I may have trouble sometimes controlling my power, but never have you had any control over me. The hand that gripped the blonde's shirt shoved him away and nearly caused him to lose his balance. After suffering an embarrassing stagger, he was able to rebalance himself and look back to Izuku. The cracks around his eyes were gone without a trace. The fierce aura he had was gone, as if it was never there, but the look he had was ever present. Giving one last second to glare at Bakugo, the black-eyed teen turned and walked away. The rest of the day blurred into night. Izuku was too distracted and focused at the same time pay much attention to anything else. The sequence of getting home, washing up after the day, eating dinner, doing some studying, and finally heading to bed all felt like one. But now, Izuku felt like he was living in every second. After all, it was sort hard to completely hold back his eager excitement when he kept looking at the big golden words of UA right in front of him. His quirk was jerking around inside his body as if it were excited too, but Izuku brushed it off. He's come too far to back down. Failure was not an option. Whatever the hell the entrance exam is, Izuku's going to pass without a cinch. If you want to be a damn hero, then quit standing around like a dumbass. Somehow, Izuku expected those exact words from Bakugo as he passed to his left and hissed the insult. The greenette noticed that the blonde didn't even look him in the eyes. If you want to be a hero, then get rid of that distasteful personality, the black-eyed teen remarked just as quickly before Bakugo tensed with fury. He has said it loud enough for a few others around him to turn their way and give curious looks. TCH. In the end, Bakugo simply clicked his tongue and moved on. Izuku decided to stand there for another second to put enough distance between them. He was feeling good and didn't want his childhood bully trying to mess it up. Once he concluded that it was good enough, he went to take a step. Owa! The surprised shout directly to Izuku's right would have normally caused him to flinch out of his own surprise and see what had happened. His quirk had other ideas apparently. In a violent burst, his right arm shot outward, which he then felt a sudden pressure collapse onto over a majority of his limb. Ah crap! I'm not even in UA yet and I'm already hitting people. That was the only logical thought that Izuku could come up with as the split-second situation digested in his mind. Nearly as fast as his arm shot out, Izuku twisted his head to the right to find out just exactly what did happen. And so far, it didn't look all too promising. From what he could tell, a girl was using his arm as a second source of support. Both her feet were way behind her center of balance, almost as if she just stopped walking and let her upper body fall forward or she tripped. His bet was set on the latter as she looked to be confused and then dumbfounded to see that she hadn't completed the fall. Brown eyes that matched her bob-cut hairstyle looked down to his arm that held her up. One of her own arms was slung over to hang free while the other had braced against his forearm. Izuku was just about to ask if she was all right before he thought, he saw the hand that was touching him glow pink at the ends of her fingertips. What titch woe? Izuku wasn't able to finish the sentence properly before his surprised shout and sudden fall cut him off. It was as if his weight was fractioned, becoming but a rock to a boulder. However, the weight from the girl still on his arm had caused him to plummet forward with the other teen in tow. It was thanks to his years of catching himself that Izuku was able to react fast enough to reach out with his left and meet it with the ground first. At times like these, Izuku was grateful for his heightened strength. Despite his seemingly unbreakable bones, falling face first into the concrete ground below didn't sound that fun on his nose. That was when the girl came crashing back down on his. Rather than landing on his outstretched arm this time, she must have instinctively pulled herself to whatever she could find. That being Izuku entirely. She landed almost directly onto his back where a sound of her breath being knocked out of her from falling onto the sturdy surface. I'm beginning to wish that my quirk did simply hit someone so that I could just apologize afterwards and be on with it. This is ridiculous. Izuku was once again grateful for his ability to hold himself up as the other students squirmed on top of him. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to just fall on you like that or use my quirk on you. Are you okay? Her voice was apologetic and full of concern. I'll be doing splendid when you get off. Izuku kept his small amount of annoyance hidden as the situation was no one's fault and just dumb luck. She exclaimed her discovery and bounced off him at once. The weight that was holding him down was gone, and was most of his strangely enough. He felt immensely light but was still connected to the ground. Apparently, his odd state was even stranger to the girl as she watched him stand perfectly fine. Is everything all right? I'm not sure. I thought I used my quirk on you, which means that you're supposed to be floating around with zero gravity. How are you still on the ground? Her question was half to herself as she was filled with curiosity. I do feel strange, like I'm much lighter. Izuku's answer caused her brown eyes to widen with awe. But I would appreciate if you would turn it off. I don't want to be overshooting things when I take the exam. An apologetic whine could be heard from the girl as she realized that she had left her quirk activated. All right, sorry. She apologized once more before connecting the tips of her fingers together to make it look like she was meditating of some sort. Izuku noticed the cat-like pads on the ends of her digits before another glow of pink could be seen. And just like that, gravity took hold of him. It felt as if the pressure on his body became heavier and fixated onto normal levels. Well, that was a series of unfortunate events, the greenette stated while tidying himself up. All of which were my fault. Again, I'm sorry. With her excitement having died down, her attitude lowered significantly. I kinda overheard a bit of the conversation between you and that other guy, so I was distracted and ended up tripping. Guess that's what I get for not paying attention where I was going. A wobbly smile came over her face as she nervously rubbed the back of her head. It was pretty obvious that she was nervous and her near fall definitely made it worse. Don't worry about it. No one was hurt. We should probably get going though. Izuku looked around to see that there were hardly any other people out here, and the ones that were had given him the other girl a strange look. An indication that they had witnessed the whole interaction. She asked confused. Well, yeah. You're going for the hero course too, aren't you? His simple statement caused the girl to blink before nodding. Why yeah. But how did you know that? The brunette asked another question. With a quirk that lets you defy the law of gravity, it would seem silly to not try to be a hero. Izuku's answer was genuine. The ability to make anything weightless was useful in so many ways. She looked a bit taken back by his answer before a real smile stretched her lips and her permanent blush brightened. Yep, that's why I'm here. If you're trying for the hero course as well, then maybe I'll see you there. A new excitement filled her as a bubbly smile looked more comfortable on her expression. Perhaps, Izuku replied. Well, good luck, she announced before turning towards the front entrance and jogging to the doors. Izuku reciprocated the gesture just before she got out of range and watched her go. She seemed nice enough and didn't react in any bad way towards his appearance. Despite meeting the kind person, there was something else on his mind. Raising his left arm into view, he furrowed his eyes at the strange occurrence. It had reacted before he even knew what was going on. That was too much of a coincidence to be ignored. Not to mention that girl's quirk had a strange effect on him that apparently has never happened to anyone else. He once again chalked it up to the oddball qualities of his own power. Izuku dropped his arm back to his side and walked toward the building. "What's up, examinees? Welcome to my show today for the yearly UA entrance exam. Can I get a hey?" There was not a single sound that responded to present Mick's attempt to get a reaction from the hundreds of teens in front of him. Izuku was one amongst this collective silence. He would prefer to keep people's eyes off him and rather at the hero they were supposed to be paying attention to. The same hero that had kept up the awkward period of silence for a few consecutive seconds waiting for a reply that name came. "Phew, tough crowd we got here. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we just jump straight to the basic rundown of the practical exam? Are you ready?" Izuku wasn't entirely sure if that second question was rhetorical or not, but he decided to stay quiet just like every other single person in the stands. But even so, Izuku listened to the hero's instructions of the mock battle they were to be put in. I was basically a giant free-for-all where they were put into a faux urban city to be put up against villains of various difficulties and points. The easiest being 1 point, the medium being 2, and the hardest being worth 3 points. The villains they were going up against? Robots. Izuku's face was neutral, but he was inwardly smiling. That meant he didn't have to hold back against a real person. However, with a quirk like his, the situation was a double-edged sword. He could attack the robots as much as he liked without restraint for his output. But that also meant he couldn't let loose of his mental hold. His quirk would for sure try to use the surrounding excitement to rile itself up and attempt another break on its leash. Izuku could not let that happen. With so many other applicants around him, there would for sure be the risk of it attacking a fellow examinee rather than the machines built for the exam. If that were to happen, then he would be immediately disqualified due to the set rule of only attacking robots. After passing this written test, all he had to do was use his quirk to an extent and take out as many villains as possible. Izuku's long since learned that he can bash and cut through metal easily enough. His above-average strength and speed will greatly help him in his chase. He only has 10 minutes to earn points and pass the exam. That's more than enough. At Battle Center B, a portion of the students from the testing room all stood together at the base of 2 massive doors. Behind the excessively large entryway was the constructed urban city that President Mike mentioned in the explanation. That's also where the examinees will find the robots, aka mobile tickets to their way into UA. Izuku stood among them. Just like everyone else, he was in an athletic suit of sorts, his being a simple pair of gym clothes similar to the ones he wore to the beach. A sleeveless shirt that lightly hugged his body as to not have any hanging bags get in the way. The same style applied to his short. He did not wear shoes as he didn't want to mess up his favorite and only pair if he needed to shift his lower legs. The plan was to mainly use his arms, but he had to be prepared. In the meantime of waiting for the signal to charge into the city, the greenette took to stretching himself out. It was a way for him to collect his senses and calm himself. Once that was done, he took the last preparation of the exam. Both his arms raised at the elbow with his palms facing him. The black-eyed teen thought for a moment before activating his quirk. Starting from his fingertips, everything besides his bones peeled away in a sickening display of all his muscles, nerves, blood, fat. Anything that wasn't a smooth white surface of his skeleton just melted away. The process continued up his arm and stopped just short of his elbows. Once that was complete, then came the harder part. There was more effort put into his concentration as the skeletal limbs underwent a transformation. As they've done many times before, the ends of his digits grew into blade-like points. The collagen frame thickened, which Izuku just thought it made them stronger rather than sturdier since he's never been able to break a bone before in his life. The same growing process came to his knuckles as they formed small tipped ends that pointed up his arm. When the change finished to Izuku's liking, the whiplash of his quirk struggling with control rippled throughout his body. The teen was able to easily counter it, but that didn't mean he liked to all the time. Even so, he was finished and ready to take on this test. Or so he thought he was. Goo! Everyone tensed in their spots as they looked to the source of the familiar shout. On top of the overseeing tower at the edge of the zone wall was present Mike. Before himself or anyone could question that command, Izuku was suddenly off balance when his leg jerked out from under him, forcing him to step forward. The actions had led him to facing the open door of the battle site. That was when Izuku realized that the hero was serious. The greenette took off without a second thought, leaving behind the other students who were still trying to figure out what was going on. As he raced out the doors, he heard Mike continue to shout at them. "Come on, listeners. You can't expect there to be a countdown for everything. Especially villain fights. Go, go, goo." Izuku knew that he was right. If he's going to pass this exam flawlessly, he'll need to think of it like a serious situation. And the first one was right in front of him. A two-pointer. A spider-like robot with a tail that looked like it could shoot something out of it. Izuku could easily see the weak spot at the base of its thin neck. The greenette's prediction was right when the end of the mechanical tail aimed directly at him after a robotical voice could be heard saying, "Target acquired." "You picked the wrong target." There was no use in talking back to the lifeless machines, but it felt nice to say it after ducking beneath the rubber ball that shot at him like a cannonball. Not enough to kill someone, but can for sure hurt like hell. He kept up his charge towards the two-pointer after dodging a second one and leaping forward after getting within range. Izuku's right fist was aimed for the neck that showed no signs of dodging itself. Just as he expected, his skeletal arm smashed straight through the metal carapace. Based on the resistance and dexterity, punching the robots would be no harder than busting the trash at the beach. Izuku extended a leg and leapt off the top of the dying machine. The ground beneath the teen closed in as he landed effortlessly. Without even looking back, he heard the robot fall to the ground with a loud thud accompanying the sounds of circuits dying. 2 points, time to get more. Izuku blasted forward in a sprint when he also heard the rest of the examinees closing in behind him. He was going to use his short head start to his full advantage. A pair of one-pointers approached from an intersection of the road. They both locked on Izuku if the brighter glow of their red eyes was an indication. Their source of mobility were large wheels that have them high speed but unstable balance. Both their arms were equipped with large shields as their only weapons. The closer robot took a downward swing at the greenette. All it took was a mere jump upwards for the boy to dodge the attack and take another leap off the provided surface. All it took was a second for his raised foot to reveal bone and strike directly onto the head of the robot with an axe kick. The metal crumbled under his power and fell immediately. Green Eyes then switched to the second robot just in time to have his point taken away. A tall boy with glasses and a well-built frame flew right into the one-pointer's chest with a brutal kick of his own. "The rest are catching up. I'll need to be quicker." Izuku hopped down from his target's fallen body and continued on. His next opponent was another two-pointer. The two of them locked eyes the moment Izuku rounded a street corner. Just as the first one, it launched rubber balls at him with dangerous speeds. The robot's efforts were fruitless as each one missed the evading greenette. All Izuku did to take this one out was to dash underneath where it could not see him and rake his right set of claws down its chassis. The attack was deep enough to hit critical systems and cause it fall. 5 points. I need more. The sounds of combat could now be heard all around him. Crashing metal and groaning mechanics of the villains. Even some explosions from some of the other examinees going all out to get whatever points they get a hold of. The smell of sweat and oil was all around from the all-out battle between man and machine. Izuku saw the three-pointer before it saw him. It had its back turned towards him that provided the excellent chance of a quick kill. A haste slash at one of its legs proved the necessity of the robots having weaknesses as the three-pointer tipped and fell to the ground. Hostile inbound. Engage self-defense proto-dash. The automated voice of the robot was cut short by a shriek of ripping metal as a skeletal hand plunged its claws into its head. The greenette grabbed whatever he could find and yanked. The number of wires and mechanical parts in his hand was a sign of the villain's defeat. Multiple sources of noise came from behind Izuku as he spun to face a duo of 2 points and a single three-pointer. A grin tugged at the corners of his lips. Now that's more like it. With no knowledge of how many villains are present or their location, it is clear that the students have to use whatever skills or abilities they have at their disposal to earn points. The principal of the #1 hero school of Japan, Nizu, sat in the observation room along with the entire staff of said school. All of them watched diligently at the many screens before them, each focused on a certain center or a specific student. Several performed with average capabilities, but the teachers were able to make out a few that stood out from the rest. While some might specialize in information gathering, the screen with a boy who had 6 arms came to the center of attention. There are plenty who use speed to pull ahead of their peers. Another boy with engines in the calves in his legs gained the focus of the teachers. But let us not neglect the ones who are able to remain calm under pressure. A third boy with bright blonde hair and support item around his waist was strangely smiling into the camera on screen. And of course, there is always ones with raw power and combat ability that make it to our exams. Katsuki Bakugo could be seen standing in the middle of a grave of broken bolts and charred metal. But there will be ones that show uniqueness. Nizu pointed out the last screen that had caught his eye. The teachers followed his gaze in time to witness a male teen with messy green hair trapped between 2 3-pointers. Most thought that the kid was about to have the floor wiped with him, but only a very perspective few could make out his grin. One of the robots went in for a hit but was easily evaded by the boy. The missed attack then hit the second 3-pointer instead, which was taken advantage of as he quickly finished it off before ending the other with a singular powerful strike. Quite the interesting group of children we have this year. Midnight wasn't wrong in her statement but made it sound much more inappropriate than necessary. Maybe so, but there's still plenty of time left. Let's see how they react to the real test. A man said from within the group as they eagerly pressed a singular button on the control panel before them. Watch out! Izuku managed to jump in the way just in the nick of time. His left arm held back the shielded arm of a 1-pointer that was previously aimed at the girl sitting on the ground beside him. With a fierce backhand, he swats the arm away before the other shield came his way. Rather than blocking, Izuku used his claws to sever the arm as it passed by. He grabbed the dismembered chunk and flung it like a frisbee at the robot's wheel. The force behind it caused it to drop like it just had a rug pulled out from underneath it. The 1-pointer wasn't able to regain itself before a skeletal fist slammed down onto its head. Izuku pulled his arm out of the fist-shaped hole and turned to the girl still on the ground. "Are you all right?" he asked while offering the backside of his hand near his wrist as his bladed fingers had a much easier time ripping flesh than metal. Izuku was surprised in a delighted way that she actually grabbed hold and pulled herself up. "Yeah, just got a little overwhelmed there. Wasn't expecting to fight robots and all. Thanks." She spoke in between breaths but put on a smile. Izuku simply gave her a nod before rushing off elsewhere. It was a couple minutes later before he was nearly forced to the ground. Everything around him shook with such violence without stop. The best way to describe is that a meteor just crashed into the site. A few other people around him were having similar problems of keeping their balance. Then, a booming metal groan echoed throughout the city. From the sound originating behind him, Izuku spun in place to lay his eyes off the biggest goddamn robot he's ever seen. Completely towering over the buildings like a kid playing with their dollhouse, the 0-pointer caused damage to the city just from being there. It had simply appeared from nowhere, most likely underground, and wasted not a single second in demolishing its surroundings. It only needed to menacingly roll down the street with its massive treads to rupture broken windows and cracks in the buildings. The 2 massive arms that swiped away at anything that stood in its path just made it worse. Showers of devastated concrete littered the streets along with the broken bodies of the other robots. Izuku was really the only one to observe the details as everyone else opted to running away on the spot. The greenette glared with half-closed eyes and crossed arms at the scene he was watching. "All right, Yue. We know you have money, but this is just excessive." The teen finally came upon the decision to leave and search for any last enemies that some people might have missed. He was comfortable with his score of being somewhere in the 50s but just wanted to be sure. Oh wow. Izuku wasn't even able to take one step before he felt his entire body lock up. Whether it was from his quirk or his own body, he didn't know. But what he did know was that leaving was no longer an option. He spun again to have the 0-pointer in view once more, the hulking machine bringing devastation to everything around it. His wide black eyes trailed to the ground before it. In the midst of the debris and crumbling concrete was the same brown-haired girl he spoke to at the entrance. Her previous cheery expression was morphed into pain and fear. The reason for this was explained as his glowing irises landed on the chunk of rubble holding down one of her legs. She was pinned, trapped with nowhere to go as the zero-pointer came closer. Like someone flipped a switch, Izuku was filled to the brim with power. Oily black cracks sprouted from his fierce eyes. The activation of his quirk pushed further up his arms until they stopped just short of his shoulders. Both his legs blew up like bombs as his flesh was ejected from his bones. Izuku didn't even feel the change happen, but he was suddenly standing on triple-jointed legs. Much like a dog's, his legs grew a second heel that morphed his leg frame to digitigrade. His toes all grew and spread apart to take a similar sharp, pointed design of his fingers. While Izuku wasn't able to inspect it, the feeling of 4 objects coming out the back of his head was evident. He knew that he was taking a huge risk by letting his quirk out this much, but he wasn't sure he had much of a choice. A thrilling energy surged through every inch of his body, skeletal limbs included. There was definitely no going back from this. Izuku set his eyes on the robot rather than the girl. Approaching her could prove problematic for both of them. With speed he's never achieved before, Izuku launched from his spot towards the zero-pointer. The world around him was an absolute blur as the large machine came within reach in just seconds. A perfectly timed jump sent him soaring through the air and at his target. The thick armor of the machine caved under the force of Izuku slamming against the bottom connector of its treads. Both his clawed feet and hands dug effortlessly into the weaker material. The greenette used both his hands to tear open a large hole into the interior of the robot. Pulling himself in, he got to work shredding every single mechanical system in sight. His aimed fury sliced electrical systems and ravaged connected cogs. Every colored wire was torn under the cruel sharpness of his digits. Meanwhile, on the outside of the rampaging zero-pointer, people took notice of the machine's odd behavior. It looked like it was suddenly struggling with itself, glitching out and having a breakdown. The girl directly beneath this display was the only one to have seen Izuku zip past her in a blur and invade the robot's inner systems. When the first explosion rung out from the behemoth's body, everyone was beginning to realize that someone was fighting against that thing. More metal groans came with the disfigured movements. Soon enough, the entire robot was suffering mass damage as mechanical meltdowns resulted in a collection of more explosions blasting from within its shell. The reactions became more violent with each bomb going off, the waves of chemical fire reaching all the way up to its chest. For a moment, they stopped. Everything seemed to freeze in place. Just for a second. A thunderous boom of a deafening detonation went off from within the zero-pointer's head. The sheer force of it thankfully knocked it backward rather than forward. "Look!" From within the crowd that watched the destruction of the towering robot, a single person pointed out a figure in the air. Leaving behind a trail of smoke from the final explosion in the villain's head was a person. Everyone witnessed Izuku plummet hundreds of feet from the air. Many panicked, but none could try to stop the human comet from closing in on the ground. It looked as if he was trying to land it, his arms up and his legs tucked in. There was no possible way for anyone to survive that fall. You learn something new every day. A loud crash of breaking concrete came the moment Izuku braced the ground. A spider web design etched itself into a large radius around him and even cratered the street under his impact. He sat crouched there with all 4 of his limbs inches buried in the concrete. It took several deep breaths before he could pull himself out and stand. The examinees were flat out shocked to see the greenette raise himself from the ground. His skeletal limbs were dripping with oil and grease but were otherwise unmarked. His clothes were a different story as most of his shirt was ripped and charred. His shorts weren't too far behind but were still decent enough. Any of the teen's skin was crystal clean. Not a smudge, not a mark. The large figure of the falling robot behind him finally fell to the ground, causing an unsettling ripple throughout the faux city. The radioactive glow of his irises stared back at the wide-eyed students. The intimidating aura they emitted made several teens take many steps back. In an instant, it was gone. Izuku did a 180 and ran back for the base of the zero-pointer. Along the way, he could feel the power surge within him fading away like a dull adrenaline. His physical appearance didn't change, but he could feel internal shifts that left him somewhat sluggish and exhausted. However, Izuku's job wasn't done just yet. The brunette was in view and she should see him approaching. While there was still signs of pain, it was overruled by amazement and shock. The brunette didn't so much as say a word before crouching down at her side and gaining grip on the large slab of rubble that was pinning her down. If Izuku had done it a minute ago, it would have been effortless. But now, his current state required a hefty lift that caused the boy to grunt with strain. With a final push, he shoved away the concrete chunk which resulted in a freed examinee. Said examinee looked nothing but grateful. "Guess this is the second time you've helped me." The girl joked with a shaky voice but still held its appreciation. She was sitting herself up when she heard a thud next to her. Seeing what it was, she saw Izuku looking half unconsciousness while laying up against a flat surface of a concrete wall. Hey, are you okay? I know I already asked that earlier, but you don't look too good this time." The brunette scooted over to where she was next to the heavily breathing boy. "Yeah, just tired. Give me a minute." With his simple request, Izuku felt his limbs shift, the bones returning to their normal shape and then being coated back by the rest of Izuku's body. The strange sensations on the back of his head sunk back into his head and vanished. All the while, the girl watched with curiosity at this transformation. The last to go were his cracked eyes, black trails finding themselves back home in his sockets. "Thanks for helping me out." Again, she made sure to give the other teens some time to recover before saying anything. "I got in your way twice. Sorry." Her gratitude fell as well as her view, which went to her ground. "Got in my way? I don't know about you, but I would much rather blame the big-ass robot that was just wrecking the whole place than someone who just as much as a victim as I was." It was easy for Izuku to see the look of unexpectation on her face. My, you two really got it rough, huh?" Before the girl could reply, their attention was caught by the voice of an approaching person. They both cited the short form of an elderly woman. "Recovery girl? What are you doing out here?" Izuku questioned the hero's appearance out here on the field. "The exam's over, dearie. Didn't you hear that loud cockatoo screaming a minute ago?" Her response had led both teens to realizing that they have indeed missed the announcement of the end of the exam. "Guess we got a little caught up," the brunette said sheepishly with a hand on the back on her neck. For a reason that they would learn in a moment, Recovery Girl grinned at them. "I can see that, but please not on school grounds. Okay, kids." Her teasing remark caused the two to realize their closeness and sent the girl into a red-faced rambling, while Izuku did feel an amount of embarrassment but had a much easier time hiding it. Anyway, she finished her sentence with a big smooch on the brown-eyed girl who was still composing herself. It would seem the sudden heal of her body had managed to bring her back. "Oh wow, thank you. That feels much better, whoa." Her thanks came to a slow halt as the hero's quirk took its toll. "What about you, young man? You need me to kiss anything better?" Recovery Girl asked after looking to Izuku. "No, actually, I'm able to heal myself. Although, I would still like to have some gummies if you don't mind." Izuku asked for the pieces of candy after seeing the hero handing some over to the girl. "Oh, no problem. Here you go. Now, both of you get on out of here. This place needs to be cleaned up." "Yes, ma'am." The brunette hopped up from her spot along with Izuku and the two walked back to the site exit. "Thank you again. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there." Izuku looked over to his walking buddy. "Really, don't mention it. Any sane person would have done the same thing. I saw that you were in trouble and I acted. Simple as that." Izuku said the truth and nothing but the truth. He was just a little annoyed that he was the only one to have turned back to help a fallen examinee. They were both now at the exam's exit. It appeared that they would be going separate ways from here. "I'm Ochako Uraraka, by the way. I hope to see you in the hero course." It was finally that Izuku learned of her name as he gave a hint of a smile. "Izuku Midoriya. I hope for the same thing." He gave a wave that Uraraka sent back and the two teens went home, the place that they would wait for the next 2 weeks to receive the letter to UA. Chapter 6. Despite the fact that it's only been a week since Izuku has taken the entrance exam at UA, it's felt closer to a month. The annoying sensation of this torturous wait was more distracting than he thought it would be. For the most part, he was patient. However, he could count on every other single examinee from that day was having the exact same problem. In order to rid of this issue, Izuku has resulted to distracting himself from the distraction. As much sense as it made, it didn't provide the best of solutions. His usual routines were also invaded by the transitioning thoughts of if he passed or failed. No matter how sure he was that it was the former, the second conclusion still messed with his head. To be completely honest, he was certain that anyone looking at his position would find it amusing. He's lost his anxiousness for tests long ago. Yet, this one was able to get him riled up just from a single reminding. Guess that made sense because of the importance that this specific test held. His enrollment into UA. The written one was easy enough. Nothing that countless hours of studying and note-taking doesn't fix. It was one hell of a mental roller coaster but got him where he needed to be. The practical exam was a different story. He had no reason to think that he did bad. However, there was the idea that maybe others had possibly done better. Yeah, that sounded stupid considering there were a few occasions he saw other examinees pitifully attacking the robots but not doing any real damage. Even a time or two he had to jump in and save some of them. If his count was correct, he was either in the late 50s or the early 60s when it came to villain points. It was sort of hard to keep track and his main focus was just to smash the machines. Oh well, it should be plenty compared to what he's heard the other students yell around him. But then there's the other thing that has him slightly worried. What did they think of his quirk? They were able to see and determine the aspects of his capabilities throughout the entire time, no doubt about it. Izuku's quirk was not flashy in the slightest. Sure, it caught people's eyes, but it always made them want to look away right after. Could that also be a deciding factor in his score? Surely not. It actually pissed Izuku off slightly just from the thought of his being the reason for him not passing. He wouldn't even be mad at his quirk, just the dumb people who would think that. Sheesh, he really is getting lost in his thoughts. Again, maybe he... Izuku. His glowing irises refocused on the piece of food on his silverware before looking up to his mother. She looked somewhat concerned and probably for a good reason. You've been starting at your food for a couple minutes. Are you all right? Izuku blinked a few times before realizing that he had gotten lost into deep thought while eating his lunch. Again. Heh, I'm fine. Just got a lot on my